So, are you looking for a JavaScript course? I think the answer is yes, because that is why you're on this page right now. So you would be delighted to know that we at linuxhint have developed a complete JavaScript Bootcamp course in which you're going to learn everything there is to learn about JavaScript, starting from the environment setup that you need to do on your PC to get started with JavaScript up to the very last topic, which is going to allow you to step inside the world of dynamic development. So the question is, what are you waiting for? Simply click on that enroll button right now to get started with the first video of the course. Have you ever stumbled upon a website like this, or maybe a website like this? Well, if yes, then chances are that you are wondering how this website is created. Well, to your knowledge, this website is created with the help of JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is really easy to execute on your PC, and you can even do that without doing a proper setup. We'll move on to the introduction of this JavaScript in this video, and then we'll tell you what are the requirements for the environment that you need to set up. So starting off with the introduction of JavaScript. So JavaScript was introduced in 1995 by Brendan Eich. In the start, the name of the JavaScript was as Mocha, but after a few months it was changed to LiveScript, but due to the popularity of Java, LiveScript changed to JavaScript. So by now, in the year 2022, it is popularly known as JavaScript or shortened to JS. Now this JavaScript is a very lightweight, interpreted or just-in-time compiled programming language with first-class functions. Now after the introduction, we are simply going to move on to how to execute JavaScript on your PC. So open up your favorite browser and then head inside the options, and you need to go inside more tools and then developer tools. Note that you might find developer tools in different options depending upon the browser that you're using. So once you're inside the developer tools, you need to head over to console. Now, most modern day browsers support JavaScript. So coming over to this console, you can simply write down the JavaScript code and it would be executed right inside this console. For example, we have this command console.log, which takes in a sentence and then it prints that sentence out into the console. So if I were to simply write this line and then hit enter, I would get the output as hello. Well, this was not a very feasible JavaScript code, but it was just to show you that how you can run JavaScript code or basic code snippets right inside the browser. After that, for the complete setup that we are going to be following throughout this course, you need two things. The first is Visual Studio Code and the second is Node.js. So to run JavaScript on your local machine, you need an environment for JavaScript, which is known as the runtime JavaScript, which is Node. So head over to node.js and then download the node according to the operating system that you're running and depending upon the architecture that is running on your PC. Since I'm running a 64-bit operating system, so I'll download Windows Installer 64-bit. Now after you have downloaded Node, the next step is to download VS Code. So download VS Code for the operating system that you're using. Now once the downloading process is done, head over to the folder where you have downloaded both of these files and install them on your PC. Now after you have installed Node on your PC, what you need to do is that you need to confirm its installation. So simply hit Windows and open up command prompt and type in node -v. Now this is going to show you the version of the node that you're running on your PC. So if you don't get a version, that means that you do not have Node installed. Now once you're done with the setup of Node, you need to open up VS Studio Code and install some of the extensions that we are going to be using throughout this course. So once you open up the VS Studio Code, you need to head over to extensions right over here. And then you need to search for Code Runner. And then you need to install this extension. After that, you need to install Live Server. And then install this one. And the last extension that we are going to be using is Prettier. And download this extension as well. Well, let me explain to you what are these used for. So Code Runner is used to execute or run our code right into the console within the VS Studio Code before actually running our HTML or JavaScript page on the browser. Live Server helps us actually launch the HTML document onto the browser, which is hosted on the local host. And lastly, Prettier is used to properly format our code in a way that is easy to read and understand. Now once you have done that, you need to create a new folder. So we're going to open up a folder right on the desktop named as JavaScript, and we're going to select that folder. And within this folder, we are going to create our first JavaScript file. So simply click on this icon to create a new file and then name your file something like demo. And make sure to end your name of the file with .js extension. Now this is going to specify to the compiler that this is a JavaScript file. Notice how the icon changes to JS. Now inside here, we can write our code something like console.log, and we can say this is my first JavaScript file. After that, we are going to learn how to execute this program using Code Runner. So if you want to run this file within VS Studio Code, then simply click on this little play icon and the output would be displayed within this terminal. Another way to do is by simply right clicking inside the text file and then click on Run Code. And the third way of doing it is by using the shortcuts Ctrl, Alt and N. So that is how you can run your JavaScript code snippet right inside VS Studio Code. After that, if I were to create an HTML file like demo.html, then I can simply host this file with the help of live server. So what I need to do is I need to click on this tiny text that says go live. Now this is going to host this HTML document onto the browser. So this is the output of our HTML page. Right now it is empty, but we are going to work around that throughout this course. Anyways, this was the basic introduction of JavaScript along with the environment setup that is required for this course. So see you in the next video. So in this first section, we are going to talk about the basics of JavaScript. In this section, we are going to cover about the syntax of JavaScript, the variables, and a few more basics of JavaScript. So let's get started with the first video of this section. In this video, we are going to talk about variables in the JavaScript. Now, variables are the most important part of any programming language, as variables are used to store data inside the memory under a specific name. So that is the definition of variables as well. Variables are nothing but named memory locations that are used to store data that is either comes from the program's manipulations or processes or from the user itself. Anyways, to create variables in JavaScript, you do not have to follow a very strict syntax. Now, syntax is basically a set of rules that you must follow in every programming language. Every programming language has their own syntax. But in JavaScript, creating a variable is as easy as giving a name to the memory that can be name and then giving it some kind of value that you want to store inside that memory. Now this approach is usable, but it is not preferred because you need to specify the type of the variable that you're going to create. Now to create a variable or to define a type, you need to use one of three words, which is var, let, and const. Now these words are known as keywords. Now keywords have predefined meaning within the programming language and you cannot change that meaning. We will talk about keywords, reserved keywords in the later video, but for now just know that when you want to create a variable, you need to use one of these keywords followed up by the name of the variable that you want to give, followed up by the value that you want to store inside that particular variable. So an example would be, I want to create a variable, so I'm going to use the keyword var, and then I want to create a variable to store the name of my car. So the name of the variable can be car, and then the name of the actual car is going to be placed inside these quotation marks. So it can be a Nissan, or I can just create a new variable, name it as car2, and it can be a BMW. So that is how you can create variables. The same approach can be used to create variables with other keywords like let, and then I can just go like cat and the name of my cat. And the same approach can be used with the const keyword as well. So simply type in const followed up by the name of the variable, which can be dog, and then the name of the dog, which is Flakes. Now for now you might be a little confused, but that is totally fine because in the next videos you will get all the understanding of variables, keywords, and how to use these variables in a much better way along with their data types. So for now simply know that variables are used to store the data inside the memory under a very specific name. And that is it for this video. In the next video, we will talk about reserved keywords. In this video, we are going to talk about the rules that you must consider or follow when you're trying to create a new variable. So, as I mentioned in the previous video that we can name our variable anything that we want, but still they must follow a certain set of rules. A variable name can consist of alphabets, numbers, dollar or hyphen sign and nothing else than that. And even these alphabets and numbers must follow a specific rule. For example, alphabets can be used in the start of the name, they can be used in the middle of the name, and they can be used at the end of the name. But that is not the case for numbers. Numbers can only be used in the middle of the variable name and at the end of the variable name, but they cannot be used at the start of a variable name. And if we talk about the dollar sign or the underscore, then it can be used at the start, in the middle, and at the end as well. Anything other than these rules would be considered invalid as the variable name. So as you can see on the screen, we have the following examples, and all of these are valid. And then we have all of these examples which do not follow the rules, so that is why they are invalid. Now let's talk about keywords as well. So if you were to follow these rules, let me just come over to my VS Code. Now if you were to follow these rules of creating a variable with only alphabets and we type something like function, Now as you can see that we have this squiggly line right beneath the word function. Now this is because this is a reserved keyword. Now as explained in the previous video, reserved keywords are those words that have a predefined meaning in the programming language, and these keywords cannot be used as names for the variables and even for the names of the functions. So some of the examples are being displayed onto your screen. As you can see that these are all of the reserved keywords in the JavaScript programming language, and these cannot be used as the names for variables or functions. So anyways, that was it about variable naming rules and keywords in JavaScript. In this video, we're going to talk about the data types of variables. But before jumping into the data types, I want to tell you the process of creating a variable. Now the process of creating a variable actually includes two different steps. The first is known as the variable declaration and the second is known as the variable initialization. So basically, whenever you type the keyword var, let or const and follow it up with the name of the variable, let's just go with xyz, this step is known as the variable declaration. So basically you're telling the computer or the machine on which you're running JavaScript that we are going to be creating a variable named at this, and then we are going to be storing some kind of value inside that particular named memory location. And when you use that variable name and store some kind of value inside it like hello, now this step is known as variable initialization. Now when you define a variable or declare a variable, the data type is not important, as you're just telling the compiler, as you're just telling the computer that we are going to be naming a memory as this one. But when you're actually initializing that variable with some kind of value, the data type is concerned, and it is very important if you want to fully optimize your project. So basically, when a variable is given a specific value, that value can fall between different types, and depending upon those types, the variable is given a specific data type. So basically we can say that a data type defines the type of data that a variable can store inside it. So let's jump with the first data type. We have strings. So let's simply just create a variable with the name a and then set it equal to double quotation marks, and within these double quotation marks we can type any textual data. Now any value that is enclosed between double or single quotation marks are known to be strings. So strings can be hello world, create a new variable, change it to b, and they can even include some kind of numbers, but when they are enclosed in double quotation mark they are not considered as number, they are considered as strings. It can be 7872 followed up by any special character and it would still be a string. After the strings, we have the data type of numbers. Now in JavaScript, we only have numbers, but in other programming languages, we have integers and floats differently. So to create a number based variable, you can simply do var and then the name of the variable, let's just go with c, and set it equal to any number without putting quotation marks around it. Then this variable c would be called as a number data type. And the cool thing about numbers is that only in JavaScript, you can create a variable, set it equal to a floating point number, and it would still be considered under the same data type as the variable c, because in JavaScript we do not have different data types for integers and floats. The next data type is boolean. Now boolean is a very special data type as it can only store one out of two options. So it can either store a true value or a false value. So to create a boolean, so simply create a variable and set it equal to true. And as you can see that the VS Code actually highlights this because it is a reserved keyword with a specific meaning that means the value is equals to 1. And yes, true means 1 and false means 0 in the programming languages. Now these boolean variables are very crucial when it comes to decision making. All of the conditions that we will put in this course will be mostly based upon these boolean variables or boolean values. Like I've said that boolean values are equal to 0s and 1. That means that you can create boolean variables by setting them equal to 0 or setting them equal to 1. After that, we have some other data types which are objects and arrays, but they are quite complicated and they have their own section. So we will talk about them in their own section. Now if you have a variable and you do not know what is the type of the value that is stored inside that particular variable, so for that we have this method which is the type of operator or method. Now inside this method, you are going to simply pass in the name of the variable of which you want to find out the data type. So it can be type of A, and to get the output, you need to wrap this whole condition in console.log. Now console.log is a function that displays the output onto the console. So if I were to simply write this code and execute it by simply right clicking and run code, on the terminal I would get that it is a string. So as you can see from the output, the type of the variable A is actually string. Now let's check for variable D. So simply change this A to D and rerun the code, and it would display the type as number. So now let's check the data type of the variable f, save the program and execute it, and we get the data type as boolean. Now one other cool fact that you can see on the screen is that all of these data types are written in lowercase. And if this string was written with a capital S, that would mean that it belongs to a class named as strings. We will talk about all of that in the future. But for now, this was all about data types in the JavaScript. In this video, we're going to finish off this section of basics of JavaScript. And we're going to finish it off with operators. Basically, there are multiple operators that are used to perform multiple operations onto the variables and onto the values of those variables. So let's start off by creating a new file, and we'll just name it as operators.js so that we don't mix up the information that we're getting. So let's talk about operators. There are various types of operators that are available in the JavaScript programming language. We have the arithmetic operators, we have the logical operators, we have the comparison operators, and then we have the assignment operators and so much more, even the decrement and the increment operators as well. But we are not going to cover all of them right now because we will need to explain them with the help of examples, and we need to do that in the if conditions, which are going to be explained in their own section. So for now we are only going to cover arithmetic operators. Now in arithmetic operators we have 4 different kind of basic arithmetic operators. So starting off we have the addition operator, which is basically to simply add 2 values or 2 variables. So let's just create a variable, let's just call it a and set it equal to some numeric value 5, and then just go variable b is equals to 10. Then we can create a third variable, name it c, and set it equal to a plus b. And then to get the output onto the console, we have already used this function, which is console.log, and inside here we're going to simply pass in the variable that we want to print, which is c. So now if I were to simply execute this program, I will get on the terminal the result as 15. So this was the addition operator. Now I can simply go with the negation operator, or to basically subtract the values from each other, and then rerun the same code, and it would give us the result to be -5. The third arithmetic operator that we have in JavaScript is basically division. So simply change the symbol to division and then rerun the code, and we will get the output as 0.5. The fourth operator in arithmetic operators is actually multiplication, which is defined by the symbol asterisk. So a asterisk b would mean a multiplied by b. And if I were to simply execute this program, I would get the result to be 50. Other than that, we are already using another operator within this code, and that is the assignment operator. Now in the video for variables, we have used this assignment operator, and we are using it even in this program. Basically, whenever we want to assign a particular value to a particular variable, we use this assignment operator, which is symbolized by this is equals symbol. So if I were to type in variable a is equals to my name, which is a string, then basically we are using a value and assigning it to this variable with the help of this assignment operator. Other than that, we have logical operators. Now these logical operators are used to implement the working of logical gates into the programming world. These logical operators are used mostly inside conditions where we want to check for a specific condition or multiple conditions. And after the logical operators, we have comparison operators. Now these comparison operators are basically used to compare 2 values or 2 or more values. These can be greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to, or double equals to. Now as we have already used the is equal symbol to assign some value to a variable, so that is why to check whether 2 values are same, we do not use a single is equal sign, we actually use a double is equal sign. So this is the is equal operator. After that, we have the ternary operator or the conditional operator. Now this operator is defined by the symbol question mark, and this operator is used to implement a condition. Now for the demonstration of all of these operators other than the arithmetic one, we are going to do that inside the if-else conditional statements. So you need to wait for a little while till we reach that section. Now in this section, we are going to talk about the conditional statements. And if you do not know, the artificial intelligence, or basically the process of giving brains to your program, is done with the help of conditional statements, which are also known as logical conditional statements. So let's get started with conditional statements, which are if statements and switch statements in JavaScript. In this video, we are going to talk about the conditional statements, and we are going to start off the conditional statements with the if-else conditional statement. So for this, let's create a new file, and we'll name this file as ifelse.js. Now, the if-else statements are used to perform certain actions upon meeting a certain condition, and if that condition is not met, even on that clause, we can perform another action. So we can simply say like, if marks are greater than 90, then reward the student. So you can see in this statement that we have a condition right over here that the mark should be greater than 90 for the student to get the reward. So we can basically map these statements out into the programming language with the help of if-else conditions. So the condition is placed right in front of if, and the then part is placed in the body of that if clause. Well, we're going to go over the syntax right now. So at first we have the keyword if. Now remember, I use the word keyword, so I'm assuming that by now you have an idea of what keywords are. And after the if keywords, we have the round brackets within we are going to place in the condition. So the condition can be anything. If we were to simply map this statement out, then we can simply say like if marks are greater than 90. And then for the body of the if condition, or where you want to place a certain action that is going to be performed upon meeting this condition, we have to simply place curly brackets. After that, in here we're going to simply do some action. Like we can print out that the student gets a $100 reward. Now this is our conditional statement mapped out in the programming world, but we still need to make a variable of marks to make this work. So simply type in var marks and set it equal to 95 and save your program. Now if I execute my program, it is going to print that the student gets a $100 reward. But what if I change the marks to something like 85? In that case, I do not get any output. That is because the condition is not met, thus the student did not get any reward. But what if we want to perform another action based upon the condition not being fulfilled? Well, we can easily do that with the help of the else clause. That is why this whole structure is known as the if and else. So basically, if this condition is met, then perform this action. And if this condition is not met, then perform that action. That is exactly the structure of this if-else conditional statement. So the if executes when the condition is met and the else executes when the condition is not met. Now to create the else part, simply type in the keyword else and then follow it up by either curly brackets. You can even leave the curly brackets if it's a single statement, but it's a good practice to use the curly brackets. So in the curly brackets, we're going to pass in the action that we want to perform in the else clause. So it can be just like that. So now if I were to execute it with the marks being 85, I would get the result that the student did not get any reward. So this was the basic if-else condition. But there is another type of structure for the if-else conditional statement, and that is the if-else-if and else structure. Basically, we can map out multiple conditions together with the help of if and else-if, and then we can have a default clause which is going to be our else block. Well, let's go over an example to better understand this situation. So now we want to write a program that can check whether the number is a positive, negative or a 0. For this we are going to use the if and else if structure. So let's start off with the first condition. So the first condition is whether the number is positive. So we can simply go like whether the number is greater than 0. In that case we are going to console.log the number is positive. And then we are going to create the else if structure. And in this condition, we're going to type in that if the number is less than 0, meaning that the number is negative, we're going to simply console.log that the number is negative. And lastly, we want to check whether the number is 0. Now, you might think that we have to do else if and then pass in that the number double equal to 0, but that is not the case. Basically, if you want to check for anything other than all of these conditions mentioned between the if statement and the else if statement, we basically use the else block. So else can be anything other than these conditions. It does not specifically has to be a third or the fourth or the ending condition. So if the number is neither positive or negative, that by default means that the number is 0. So in the else block, we do not have to put any condition. We simply have to type in that the number is 0. Now what we need now is a variable. So I'm going to create a number variable and set it equal to some positive value. Let's just go with 5 and then execute my program. So now when I execute my program, I get the output as that the number is positive. Let's check it with a negative number. Let's just go with -3 and then execute our program, and it displays us that the number is negative. But what if we go with the 0? In this case, we get the output as the number is 0. So that is how you can check multiple conditions with the help of if, else if and else statement block. Now after the if-else conditional statements, in JavaScript we have another type of conditional statement which are known as the switch statements. So we're going to be focusing on the switch conditional statements in this video. But before jumping into the switch condition, we must answer the question that why should we even use switch when we have the if-else conditional statement. Well, basically, if-else conditional statements are used when we have a range of conditions. Basically, we can say that when the numbers are more than 90, it can be anything more than 90. But in contrast to that, switches are used when we have a very specific value that we want to put a condition on. Basically, if we want to put a condition upon the value 1, which would mean the day of the week. Well, I will take the same example and explain to you it in a better way. So let me just first write a statement that I would convert into the conditional statements. So now as you can see on the screen, I want to show the day of the week based upon a number, and the numbers value are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, and the corresponding days of the week are written right over here. Let me just first comment them out, and we will talk about what these comments are, but we just don't have to worry about them for now. Anyways, so starting off, I want something to store my number, so that is going to be variable number, and let me just give it a value right off the bat. Let's just go with 3, and then we are going to apply the switch statement upon the value of this number. So simply type in switch, and then within the round brackets we are going to pass in the variable on which we want to apply the checks. So that is going to be the variable num. After that we are going to open up curly brackets. Now for every condition we have to use something known as a case. So the case keyword. Now what is a case? Case basically means that if this is the case, or if this is the case, meaning that if this is the value of the variable, then apply these steps, or if this is the case, then apply these steps. Let's just go with the example and you will understand what that is. So the first case is if the value is equals to 1. Here we write the value, and then we follow it up with a colon, and after the colon we need to type in the actions that we want to perform. But for now we simply want to perform console.log, which is going to print out something onto the console, and type that the day of the week is Monday. Now that we have done our action, we need to apply a break statement. Now you might be wondering, what is this break statement? Basically, we need to tell the compiler that okay, our condition has been met and we have performed our action. Now we need to get out of this whole switch structure. If we do not put the break statement or the break keyword, the program is going to go over all of the remaining cases and then perform all of those actions as well. So in the case statement, or in the body of the case statement, we need to pass in the break statement. Now after the break statement, we can simply type in the next case. So the case number 2 is going to be when the value of the variable num is 2. In that we want to print in console.log the day of the week is Tuesday, and again we need to type in the keyword break. And now we have to write this 5 more times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it and change the corresponding values. Now as you can see on the screen that I have created 7 conditions representing 7 numbers, and upon those 7 numbers I have given the action, which is to console.log the day of the week. So now if I were to simply execute this program, you can see that if the value is 3, we get the output as Wednesday, and if I change this value to, let's say, 6, then the output changes to Saturday. But everything is not done yet. What if the user inputs the value as 8? So if I execute my program, I do not get any output. So how do we manage this? Basically in switch statements we get a default keyword as well. So if none of these cases match the condition, then there is a default block that would be executed. For that, what we need to do is we need to come out of the last case block and then type in the keyword as default, and then follow it up with the colon, and then you type in the action that you want to perform when none of the conditions are met. So I would simply type in wrong input. Now that we have managed an error that could have occurred, so now if I execute my program with the value being 8, the output is going to be wrong input. So that is how you use the switch case statements with the default block. In the previous section, we talked about operators, but we did not go into examples of operators, especially logical operators and the ternary operators. And the sole reason for that was we needed to learn conditional statements so that we can apply those operators in real life scenarios. So in this video, we are going to talk about operators included inside the conditional statement. So let's start off with our first example. So starting off, we are going to create a program that checks whether a number is non-zero or 0. Now previously we had done a similar example in which we check whether a number is positive, negative or 0, but in this particular example we have to merge both of those conditions. We have to merge whether a number is positive or negative into one single condition, and to combine those conditions of whether a number is 0, of whether a number is positive or negative, we are going to be using something known as the OR logical gate, but in the programming world it's simply known as the OR operator. It performs very similar to the OR logical gate. So let's start off. At first we need a number, so I'm just going to create a variable. I'm going to call it number and set it equal to something like 5. After that, we have to place our if condition. So let's see what are the two conditions that we have to combine. So the very first condition is that the number should be greater than 0, and the other one is that the number should be less than 0. Now that we have these conditions, let's write them down between the round brackets, like number should be greater than 0 and then number should be less than 0. Now to combine these with the OR gate, you simply have to use two pipe symbols. Now in JavaScript, double pipe sign means the OR operator. So this condition would be true when this condition is true or this condition is true. So upon that, we want to simply type in console.log, and what we want to do is we want to print that the number is non-zero. And for the else part, we can simply go like console.log, the number is 0. Now if you were to simply execute this program, we would get that the number is non-zero because the number we had taken was 5. Now if we simply change that to 0, we would get that the number is 0 due to this else block. Now we also want to check for this condition in which the number is less than 0. For that, let's type the value as -3 and then execute our program, and we get that the number is non-zero. So our program is working perfectly fine. Let's take another example that we had used previously for the student marks in the student getting the reward, and we're going to extend that example so that we can apply more operators in that particular example. So as you can see that we have the following condition, that if the marks are 90 or greater than 90 and less than or equal to 100, then the reward is $100. Similarly, if the marks are 80 or greater than 80 and less than 90, then the reward is 80. Similarly, we have all of these conditions. Now we are going to map out these conditions in the JavaScript. So for that, we are going to first create a variable that are going to store our marks, which is variable marks, and we're going to give it some value like 95. After that, we're going to start off our if condition. So simply type in the keyword if followed up by the condition, and in here we're going to simply say like if the marks are equal to or greater than 90, and then we're going to put the second part of the condition, which is the marks are equal to or less than 100, and then we're going to combine these statements with the help of the AND operator. That would basically mean that for this whole if statement to be true, both of these statements should be individually true. After that, we're going to put the curly brackets and use the console.log to prompt the student about the reward. After that, we're going to simply type in the else if block, and in here we're going to type in the second condition, which the marks are greater than or equal to 80 and less than 90. In this particular case, the student gets a reward of $80. Similarly, we're going to copy this else if block a few more times and write down our conditions. After that, create our else block in which we are going to simply print that the student does not get any reward because his marks are less than 50. Now that the conditions are all set, we can verify the working of our program. So execute a program with the marks being 95, and the output is that the student gets a $100 reward. Simply modify the value of the marks to, let's say, 85, and then execute the program. We get that the student gets a $80 reward. And let's check the else block. So give it some value like 25 and then execute the program, and we get that the student does not get any reward, study more. Anyways, that is how you use operators in conditional statements. But now we are going to talk about an operator that is used to apply a conditional statement, which is known as the ternary operator. So now let's talk about the ternary operator. So basically, the ternary operator is used to apply a condition. Now, the ternary operator is represented by a question mark. However, it is not used in a traditional way of using an if-else statement, because in if-else statement you place in the operator, which is the if keyword, first and then you put in the condition. But in the ternary operator, you place in the condition first. So let's just quickly go over an example. So what if I want to redo the example in which I was basically getting the number and checking whether that number was a non-zero value or a 0. So we're going to do that with the help of the ternary operator. Now, like I've said, we need to place in the condition first. So we're going to create our variable over here, variable number, and let's just give it a value like 22. And then we're going to start off condition within the round brackets. So we're going to say that if the number is greater than 0 or the number is less than 0. In this particular case, we want to apply a ternary operator or a conditional statement. So anyways, followed up by a condition, we have the ternary operator, which is a question mark. And after the question mark or after the ternary operator, we have the action to be performed if the condition is true. So simply type in console.log and then the number is non-zero. And for the else part, or if you want to perform an action if the condition is not true, then you simply put a colon right after the first action and then you define the second action. And this is your ternary operator in action. Now if I Control S, then the prettier is going to format it into individual blocks, which is easier to read. So we have our condition, the ternary operator, the action to be performed if the condition is true, and the action to be performed when the condition is false. So let's execute this program, and we get that the number 22 is a non-zero value. And if we change it to something like negative 22, then we get it is still the non-zero value. And we can change the number to 0 and then execute the program, and we will get that the number is 0. So that is how you can apply ternary operator and save a lot of time, as it requires far lesser words. Anyways, that was all about operators in the conditional statement, and that also brings us to the end of this section. Starting from the next section, we are going to be focusing on loops. This section is all about loops. Now loops are very crucial as they are such a piece of code which repeats itself. Basically, it saves the time of the developer, and it also saves the memory of the program that you're going to develop. So let's get started with loops in JavaScript. In this video, we are going to talk about the for loop. So before jumping right inside the for loop, we should know what a loop is and why is it used. So basically, a loop is nothing but a block of code that is executed for a specific number of times. And a loop is used when we want to repeat a block of code for a specific number of times, like the definition, but we still need a practical example. So imagine that we want to print numbers starting from 1 to 10 onto the console. So you might think that the approach is console.log, and in here we're going to pass in our number like this, and then we're going to duplicate this line 10 more times and then change the numbers like this. So if I execute my program, I would get the output as 1 to 10. But what if I told you that there is a way to do the same exact thing with only 4 lines of code? Or if we were to simply take this counting from 1 to 1000, then you can even do that with only 4 lines of code. Yes, that is true, and we can do that with the help of loops. So let's learn about the first loop, that is the for loop. So to use the for loop, we have to fulfill 3 basic conditions. So to use the for loop, we have the for keyword and then followed up by round brackets, and within these round brackets we need to set up 3 different type of statements, and all of these statements are separated by a semicolon. So let's talk about the first statement. So the first statement is known as the initialization statement. Basically, you need to create a variable that is used for the iteration of the for loop. So most of the times it is known as variable I, and then you need to set it equal to a specific value. Since we are counting from 1 to 10, we are going to take the lower number as the starting value. So I'm going to set it equal to variable I is equals to 1. The second statement is known as the conditional statement. In this statement, we actually set up a condition on which the loop is going to run. So we want this loop to run until our counter variable goes up to the number 10. So this means that the counter variable is less than or equal to 10. The last statement is known as the resultant statement. Basically, this is a statement that is executed after the body of the for loop is executed on every iteration. So what I want to do is, after every iteration, I want to increase the value of I by 1. So I can simply type in I is equals to I plus 1, or I can write it as I plus plus. After that, we have the body of the for loop. Basically, this would contain the code that is to be executed for every iteration of this for loop. So as we were trying to print the number onto the console, so our body would contain console.log function. And in here we can simply pass in the variable that is increasing for every iteration of the for loop, that is I. So if I do this and execute my program, I get the same exact output as I got with 10 lines of code. Now what if I simply wanted to count up to 1000? I would simply come over here and change this condition to while I is less than or equal to 1000, execute the for loop. With this, if I simply executed my program, I will get the counting up to 1000. So let me bring up my terminal, and you can see that the counting does not miss any number and it counts up to 1000. Now this for loop can also be used to count from 1 to 1000 but print only the even numbers. Now there are multiple ways of doing that. We can include an if statement in the body of the for loop and simply say like if I, and in the condition I can simply type in I modulus 2 is equals to 0. If this is the case, then I want to simply print out the value of the I onto the console. So if I do this and execute my program, you can see that I have only printed out the even numbers onto the console. Now there is another approach of doing the same thing. For this, we are going to clear the body of the for loop, and we are going to change the resultant statement from I++ to I is equals to I plus 2. So basically, for every iteration, the value of I is going to jump 2 points. Now to do this, we need to change the initial condition as well. So if I were to go with the initial condition as I is equals to 1, we would get all of the odd numbers, but we want the even numbers, so let me change it to I is equals to 2. And after that, in the body of the for loop, I can simply go console.log and then pass in my I variable. So let me just clear up my terminal and then execute the program. You can see I have the same exact output, which is to print out the even numbers up to 1000. Now let's take one final example to better understand the for loop. In this example, what we are going to do is that we are going to create a table printer. Now what this table printer would do is, we will give it a number and it will print its table up to 10. So let's start off with the variable number. So let's start off with a table of 5. After that, so let's create our for loop and we're going to start this for loop from I is equals to 1. After that, we want this table to run while the value of I is less than or equal to 10. After that, for every iteration, we want the value of I to increment by 1. After that, in the console, we can simply print out something like number, then multiplied by, then the value of I, and then separated by number actually multiplied with I. And I also need to put an is equal symbol right over here. So let me put that in the form of a string. And now if I were to simply execute this program, you can see on the terminal that we get the table printed of the number 5. We can change the number, like let's go 7, and then execute the same program, and this time around we have the table of number 7. So that is how you can use the for loop to basically reduce the number of lines that you require to perform a specific action. After the for loop, we have another loop in the JavaScript, which is the while loop. The syntax of the while loop is quite different from the for loop. If you were to simply talk about the syntax, then we have the keyword while followed up by round brackets, and within these round brackets you need to specify the condition. The condition which needs to be true for the body of the while loop to execute. And then the body is enclosed within the curly brackets. Now in comparison to the for loop, you can clearly see that we do not have to set up an initialization statement, a conditional statement, and a resultant statement. Basically, we do have to do that to stop ourselves from jumping inside an infinite loop, but let's explain that slowly. So let's take an example of the counter. To create a counter, we need to store the start of the counter in a variable. So let's create a variable now and then set it equal to 1. After that, we want this counter to execute up to 1000, and therefore we need to use a loop. So we're going to use the while loop and we're going to say, while this number is less than or equal to 1000, execute the body of the while loop. And in the body of the while loop, what we're going to do is that we're going to simply say console.log and then the variable num. After that, we can execute the program, but we would run into an infinite loop. So let's see what I'm trying to say over here. So if I were to simply execute my program, you can see that I only get the value 1 printed for an infinite number of times. It's still printing. To stop the infinite loop, simply press Ctrl+C. After that, we need to make some kind of modification. So as you can see in the output that the value did not change. This means that we need to include a resultant statement within the body of the while loop. So after we have printed the value of num, we need to increase its value. So we can say num is equals to num plus 1, or again we can just go like num plus plus. Now the value of the number variable is counting upwards. So now if I were to simply execute my program, I will get the value from 1 up to 1000. Now we have learned something from this example. Even though we said that the while loop does not contain a resulting statement, but we do need to write a resultant statement within the body of the while loop, otherwise the loop would run for an infinite number of times. Anyways, let's take another example that we have done in the for loop. So let's create an example to print every fifth number. So for this, what we can do is we can simply go like, if the value of the number modulus 5 is equal to 0, only in that case we're going to simply print out the number onto the console. And then after the if statement, we need to increase the value of the number variable, so num plus plus. So let's save our program and then execute the program. And now as you can see from the output that we have printed every fifth value. Anyways, that was all about the while loop. So make sure to practice while loops. In the next video, we're going to talk about the do while loop. Now let's talk about the last type of loop that we have in JavaScript, which is the do while loop. Well, actually it is not the last type, as we have the for in and the for off loop, but they are considered to be the variants of the for loop, so that is why I'm saying the last type. Anyways, the do while loop is very close to the while loop but with an additional feature. In the do while loop, the do part of the program, the task that we want to perform, is always executed at least once, even if the condition of the while loop does not meet. So to use the do while loop, we have the keyword do followed up by curly brackets, and within these curly brackets we type the task to be performed. After that, we have the while keyword followed up by round brackets, and within these round brackets we type in the condition on which the loop is going to be executed, and then at the end we have a semicolon. So this is the basic structure or the syntax of the do while loop. So let's take an example. For this, what we're going to do is that we're going to create a variable num and we're going to set its value equal to 1. After that, we're going to simply type the do part and we're going to simply print out the value of the variable num. And for the condition of the while loop, we are going to simply say that if the value of the number is greater than 1, only then execute the do part in the later on iteration. So if I were to write this and execute this program, we would only get the output as 1. Because the condition is actually false, we only run the do part only once. So to make use of this while condition or to execute the loop more than once, what we need to do is that we need to make this condition true, and we can do that with the help of num plus plus. So now this would become an infinite number of loop. So what we're going to do is that we're going to add in the AND operator and say and the number is less than or equal to 10. With this, we have the do while loop that is going to print the number from 1 to 10. So if I were to simply execute my program, I get the output from 1 to 10. So the do while loop is extremely useful when we have to execute the body of the loop at least once, because the do part would always be executed regardless of the condition being true or false. Anyways, that was the do while loop in JavaScript. Now this is going to be a very short section about arrays. Now arrays are named variable locations in the memory that are used to store multiple variables. Let's talk more about arrays in the next video. So up until this point, we were using the variables to store a single value. But what if I told you we can use a same variable to store multiple values at the same exact time? And even that variable can contain values of different data types. It can have the values of strings, meanwhile having the values of numbers. Yes, that is possible with the help of arrays. So let's talk about arrays. Basically, simply create a variable, let's just call it items. So basically we're going to store multiple items within this variable and then set it equal to all of the items that you want to store. Now how are you going to do that? You might think that you simply type in the first item like box and then separate the second item with the help of a comma and then type in the second item like crate and then include some numbers as well. Well, you would be wrong, but you would not be far away from the truth. All we need to do is that we need to wrap all of these items that we want to store under the same name of items in square brackets. And once you do that, you have successfully created an array. Now let's talk about arrays in a little more detail. So basically, arrays are nothing but named memory locations that are used to store multiple values. Now, you might recognize the term named memory location as they are the definition of variables as well. So arrays are basically variables that can store multiple values in them at the same time, even of different data types. So let's start off by creating a very simple array that holds up multiple numbers. So we are going to create a variable or an array with the name of num and then set it equal to square brackets as to tell the program that now we are creating not a variable but an array. We need to put square brackets around the values of the variable. After that, we type in the numbers that we want to store under this num variable. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And all of the entries of an array must be separated by a comma. So now we have created an array which contains 5 numbers. Now to get the output or to print these numbers onto the console, what we can do is that we can simply go console.log and then pass in the array name as num. And if I simply execute this program on the terminal, I get the array as it is onto the console. But you can see that this is not a very viable approach. We may want to only print out the value 3 or the value 4. Well, how to do that? Well, we can do that with the help of indexes. Now what are indexes? So basically, every item that is stored inside an array is stored under the same name. So how do you differentiate different items? Well, you do that with the help of indexes, and indexes simply mean so the first element is placed at the index value 0. The second element is placed at the index value 1, which would mean this number 1 is placed at index value 0. And this would mean that in this array, the value box is placed at the index value 0. And then the next element or the next entry is placed at the index value 1. So now if we wanted to print out one item or one entry from an array, what we can do is we can use the console.log function, and in here we're going to use the name of the array followed up by the index value of the element that we want to print. Now like I said, the index value starts from 0. So if I want to print out this number 3, I would have to use the index value 2 because this one has the index value 0 and then this one has the index value 1, and this one, that the value that we want to print, has the index value as 2. So if I do that and run my program, I get the output as 3. Now let's use this with the other array. So what if I want to print crate onto my terminal, or to use the value crate? What I would do is I would use the array name as items followed up by square brackets, and within these square brackets I'm going to specify the index value of the value crate, which is going to be 1. So now if I execute my program, I get the output as crate. And then we can even use this index value to replace a value in the array. So basically, what if I want to replace this value crate with something else? I can easily do that by accessing the value with the help of the index. So my array name is items followed up by the index value whose value I'm going to change, which is 1. And then I'm going to use the assignment operator and provide the new value. So what if I want to simply change it from crate to machine? So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to print out the complete array with the help of console.log followed up by the name of the array, which is items. And if I execute my program, this time around you can see that the items of my array are box, machine, 12 and 3. So the value crate has been replaced. So that was all about arrays in JavaScript. So let's quickly go over what arrays are. Well, arrays are used to store multiple values under the same variable name, and these values can be of mixed data type. These values can be identified with the help of indexes. An array index starts from the value 0, and we can access elements of an array with the help of index value along with the name of the array. In this video, let's take some examples to better understand arrays. So continuing from where we left off in the last video, I'm going to clear my terminal and I'm going to clear my program file as well. So this time around we're going to create a scenario. So for example, you have created a program that asks the user for input of 10 different numbers. So you want your program to identify those numbers as positive, negative or zeros. So very first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to take the input of the user in the form of an array. So for that we're going to create a variable input, which is going to be our array, and in here we're going to store 10 different number values. So suppose that these were all of the inputs made by the user. So now what we want to do is that we want to iterate through this array, and then for every element of this array we want to check whether it is a positive number or a negative number or even a 0. So to traverse through this array, what we're going to do is that we're going to use a for loop, and we're going to start the initialization statement of the for loop from the value 0, as we're going to be iterating through the indexes, and the indexes start from the value 0. After that, we want this index value to go up to 10, and then we want to increase the index value on every iteration by 1. After that, what we're going to do is that we're going to put an if statement and say that if the input, which is the array name, and then the index value, which is I, is greater than 0, in that case we want to use the console.log function. And inside the console.log function, first we want to print out the value, so it would be input and then the variable I, and then we're going to print out that this value is a positive number. Now after the if statement, we have the else if statement, and in here we're going to check whether the value is a negative number. So input followed up by I is less than 0. In that case we're going to use the console.log function. We're going to print out the value input I, and then separate it and say is a negative number. And lastly, if it is neither positive or negative, we simply want to print out the value input I and print that it is a 0. Now let's save our program and execute it, and we get this result onto the terminal. So we have all of the values inside the input array, and every value is checked against our conditions. So 12 is a positive number, 35 is a positive number, negative 23 is a negative number, and 0 is a 0. Now let's take another scenario in which we did not know how many times the user has placed the values. So we knew that we had 10 values, but if I were to randomly delete some values, then this for loop would run into an error because we do not have 10 values, but our condition is 10. So in such cases where you do not know the length of the array, we have this attribute of every array that we create, which is the input.length attribute. Now this .length attribute actually provides us with the length of the array. Again, if you want to get the length, you need to simply use the name of the array, follow it up with a dot operator, and then use the attribute which is .length. So if I were to save this program and execute it, this time around I would not run into any sort of error. Anyways, that was an example of arrays with the help of for loop and if statements. Functions, one of the fundamental concepts of programming. Functions are used to divide your bigger problem into smaller chunks so we can tackle them one by one. So let's talk about how to create and use functions in JavaScript. In this video, we're going to talk about the functions that we can create and use in JavaScript. So before jumping inside functions, let's talk about what functions are. Well, function is a block of code, or function contains a block of code that is to be executed multiple times whenever we want it. So basically, if we have some kind of functionality in the program that is to be executed multiple times and we do not want to write the code for that functionality multiple times, what we can do is that we can create a function of it and write down its functionality only once. And then when we want to use its functionality, we only have to call the function's name and our functionality would be performed with our program. So this saves our program with a lot lesser amount of code lines, and this also saves the time of the developer. So let's talk about how to create a function. Now to create a function, what we need to do is that we need to use the keyword function, follow it up with the name of the function. So suppose that we want to greet a new user. So we want to create a function that is going to greet a user. So therefore I'm going to name it as greet user. And then it is followed up by round brackets. Now we are going to learn about what we need to put inside the round brackets, but in the later video. Now after the round brackets, what you need to do is that you need to put curly brackets, and in between these curly brackets you're going to type the functionality of the function. So like I said, I wanted to greet the new user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say console.log, and then in here I'm going to say like hello new user. Now I have created the function. So you might think that okay, I just need to run my program and the new user would be greeted. So let's try that. So if I run my program, as you can see in the output that I did not get anything. Now that is because whenever you create a function, to get something out of that function, you need to call that function within your program or wherever it is needed. So to call that function, what we need to do is that we need to type the name of the function, which in our case is greet user, follow it up with round brackets and then a semicolon. Now again, if you have written something in these round brackets, you need to pass them in here as well, but we'll learn about parameters and arguments in the later video. For now, let's just go with simple greet user followed up by empty round brackets and then execute our program. And just like that, on the terminal we get the output as hello new users. So suppose that you have developed an application which lets user create their account, and whenever a user creates a new account, it is greeted by this function. So that means that this function greet user would be called multiple times like this, and then what we can do is we can simply execute a program and we get multiple greetings onto the terminal. Now this was the basic information about functions, but in the next video we will talk about functions in much more detail. In this video we're going to talk about functions in a much more detailed manner. So let's start off with creating a simple function. So let's assume that we want to create a function that sums up two numbers given to it. So we have the keyword function followed up by the name. So I'm going to call this one as add number and then follow it up with round brackets and then curly brackets. Now what we want this function to do is we wanted this function to add two numbers which are given to it by the user. So we do not know what are the functions that it has to add. So for that particular action, we want this function to be accepting of any two numbers. Now how do we do that? We do that with the help of parameters. Now what are parameters? So let me just add in a comment over here and just say parameters are those. So basically parameters are the values that a function requires to perform its functionalities, and the parameters are defined when you're defining a function within these round brackets. So as I've mentioned that this function requires two numbers, so I'm going to call that one as number 1 and number 2, and then within the body of the function we can simply say console.log, so it has to add in these numbers, so number 1 plus number 2. Now so what about calling this function? So when we are calling this function, we need to provide some kind of values to these parameters. We cannot simply go with this add number. So if we were to simply execute it, it would give us a NaN, which is not a number. Anyways, let's not talk about that error. Let's talk about parameters. So the other counterpart of the parameters are known as arguments. So arguments are the values that are given to a function when you're calling that function. For example, if I want this function to add the values 5 and 10, for that I'm going to pass these values in the round brackets. So first value is 5 separated by the second value by a comma and the second value 10. So now if I were to simply execute this program, I would get the output as 15. Again, parameters are the values that are required by the function to perform its functionalities, and arguments are the counterparts of the parameters that are provided during the function call. Now the parameters of the function must always be defined when you're declaring the function. So this part of the function where we define the functionality of the function is known as declaring the function, and we need to define the parameters in this part. We cannot create a function without parameters. Suppose that we remove the parameters and then save our program and execute it, we will get this error. Well, there is a way of doing this, but we will talk about that later on in this video. But for now, remember that we cannot create a function without parameters and then expect it to work on arguments. Now what if we want the function to perform the addition of these two numbers but not show the result onto the screen or onto the console? We want it to store this result into a separate variable. So how do we do that? Well, we have something known as the return statement. So I'm going to change this output and use the keyword return, follow it up with our process, which is num1 plus num2. Now what does this return statement do? So this return statement is going to perform this action and then return the result to the caller. Now what do we mean by this? So if I were to simply say that we have another variable, let's call it result, and then the value of the result is equal to the value that we get from the function add num, and we're going to provide the arguments as 3 and 17. So now what is going to happen is that these 3 and 17 are going to head inside these parameters num1 and num2, and then the addition of num1 and num2 is going to occur, and then this return statement is going to return the output to the calling function. Now this calling can be a function as well as a simple variable like this result. So if I were to simply check the value inside the result variable at the end of this program with the help of console.log function and then run my code, we can see that the value of num1 plus num2 has been stored inside the result variable. So that is how you can use the return statements to not show the output onto the screen or onto the terminal, but rather store it in some other variable. As in the previous video, we had created a function that was used to greet new users, but we want that function to greet a specific person. For that, we are going to create a function. Again, the name is going to be the same, which is greet user, but this time around we are going to use parameters. So the parameter is going to be name. After that, we're going to create the body of the function, and we're going to simply say console.log hello and then comma and then the name. Now for the function call, we're going to simply say greet user, and in the argument we're going to pass in the name of the user. So let's say the name is linuxhint. So save that program and execute the program. We have hello linuxhint. But what if we have a long list of username? So suppose that we have an array of users, and in here we have all of the names of all the users that we have on our application. And now what we want to do is that we want to take these names from this array, pass them to the function and greet all of these users. So for this we are going to use a for loop and say for variable I is equals to 0, I is less than user.length and I++. And for every iteration, we're going to call the function greet user and then pass in the value placed at user index I. Now if I were to simply execute my program, I will get this output on the screen. So hello linuxhint, hello John, hello Doe, hello Mani, hello Brendan Ike. Now there is another way with the help of the return statement. So instead of the console.log, we are going to simply use the return statement, and we are going to simply return a string which is hello, and then we are going to do string concatenation with the help of the plus operator, and then type in our name which has been passed to the function. Now when we use the return statement, we now know that we need to catch the returned value. So for that, we're going to come to the calling part, and we're going to store it inside a message variable, and after that we're going to use the console.log function to print out that message onto the terminal. So let me clear up my terminal, save my program and execute it. So this time around we have the same exact output, which is to hello and then followed up by the names of the users. So that is how you can use functions along with arrays to pass in the names and to greet every individual user. So that is also how you can use the return statement in functions. Now after this, let's talk about the default parameters. So suppose that we have created a function to add two numbers. So add number 1, number 2. And it's going to simply return number 1 plus number 2. And then when we call this function, we go with result variable is equals to add number, and in here we only pass in one number. And at the end, we're going to simply do console.log, and in here we're going to print out the result variable. So if we were to simply save this program and execute it, we will get a not a number variable. Now why is that so? This is because the function required 2 parameters and we only passed in one argument. But what if we were to give the option of having only one argument to the user, so the user can only add in one number into this function? So in that case, we need to pass in default parameters. So for the number 2, we're going to give it our default value. So we're going to set it equal to 0. So what is this going to do? So basically it is going to tell the program that if no value is provided for the number 2 parameter, then simply take its value as 0. So now if I were to simply execute the same program, it is going to return us 1 because 0 plus 1 equals to 1. Similarly, you can provide default parameters to all of the parameters. So I can set this number 1 equal to 0 as well. So now if I were to simply call this function without the arguments, I will get the result as 0 instead of NaN because the values are 0 plus 0. So this is the third part of the function section, and in this video we're going to talk about some of the advanced concepts of function, and later on when we are talking about objects, we are going to cover functions in that section as well. So you can understand the use of functions as we have multiple concepts to deliver to you guys. Anyways, let's talk about the advanced concept. The first concept that we are going to talk about is how to catch the arguments if no parameters are defined. In the previous video, when we did this, we ran into this error because we did not create any parameters, but we're trying to give some values to those parameters. At that moment, I said that this is not possible, but that was possible due to a concept which is known as catching the arguments even when the parameters are not defined. So let's create a scenario. So we are going to create a function that is going to simply add in the values that have been passed inside its arguments. And that function is going to be called as add numbers. So let's first create a variable, call it result and set it equal to our function add num, and in here we're going to create our arguments. So let me just quickly type some values. After that, we're now going to create this function add num but without the use of parameters. So the keyword is function and then followed up by the name of the function add num. We're going to not use parameters, we're going to head inside the body of the function, and in here I'm going to tell you that when you pass in the arguments, those arguments are stored inside the arguments array. So every function that you create has a pre-built array which is known as the arguments array. And then we can access its elements with the help of normal accessing methods of arrays, which is by square brackets, or we can access its attribute with the help of the dot operator like dot length. So let's use this. So we want to add the numbers that have been passed to the arguments. So for this, let's create a variable sum and set it equal to 0. After that, we are going to iterate through the array of arguments, which we can do with the help of the for loop. So for I is equal to 0 because the initial index is 0. After that, we want this index value to go up to the maximum limit of the arguments array. So arguments dot length, and then in the resultant statement I simply want I++. After that, I'm going to simply do sum is equals to sum plus arguments arrays value at the I index. Now once everything is done, once we have added all of the arguments, I simply want to return the value of the sum variable. Now let's move this line after the function has been created, and then console.log the value stored inside the result variable. So now if I were to clear my terminal and execute my program, I will get the value as 144, which is the sum of all of these values. So that is how you can use the arguments array, which is a pre-built array of every function that you create, to catch the arguments even when the parameters are not defined. Let's use this same set of arguments and let's try to find the maximum number out of these arguments. So we're going to change the name of the function. So it's going to be check max. Let's copy this, let's paste it over here. And instead of creating a variable for the sum, we're going to create a variable for max and set it equal to -infinity. Now this -infinity is actually a value that we have in JavaScript. After that, we're going to use the same for loop to iterate through every element of the arguments array, but inside the body of the for loop we are going to change some things. So at first we are going to create an if statement, and the condition is going to be if the element at the ith index is greater than the maximum value. In that case, we're going to change the value of maximum variable to arguments to the value at the ith index. If this condition is true, then we're going to change the value of the max variable and set it equal to the current value in the arguments array. After that, we're not going to return sum, but rather we're going to return the variable max. So now if I were to execute this program, I will get that the number 77 is the maximum number within the set of arguments. So that is how you can use the arguments array to catch the list of arguments that have been passed to the function. Now let's quickly talk about the self-invoking function. Basically, self-invoking functions are those functions that are executed without having a caller to call them. So to create a self-invoking function, we do not even have to type a name. We can simply type the keyword as function followed up by round brackets and then followed up by curly brackets. And within the curly brackets, we have the functionality of the self-invoking functions. So we can simply say, hello, I am a self-invoked function. Now when you're creating self-invoking functions, you need to end the function with a pair of round brackets. That would mean that this function is calling itself. So if I were to simply save this program and execute it, on the terminal I would get that hello, I am a self-invoked function. So that is how you can create self-invoking function. Now after the self-invoking function, we're going to tell you about the different ways of creating functions in JavaScript. So you can see in the code that there are multiple methods of declaring or creating a function. The very first one is the one that we have been using so far, which is to use the keyword of the function followed up by the name of the function, followed up by the parameters, and then followed up by the body of the function. Now we have this example of that method. So we have the function and the name is my function. It takes in two parameters a and b and then returns the multiplication of a and b. So that was the first method of creating a function. Another method of creating a function is by creating a variable and setting its value equal to a function. Basically, we do not have to name that function anything because we are going to be using the name of the variable as the name of the function. So in the second method, we actually create a variable and then set its value equal to a function. And this time around, as you can see that after the function keyword, we are not providing the name of the function, and this is because we are going to be using the name of the variable as the name of the function. So if we were to take an example of this, we have it let z is equals to the function name has been called by the name of the variable, which is x. Now in the third method, we are going to be use the function constructor. So a constructor is when you use the keyword new with the name of the object. Now we are going to talk about objects in the next section, but for now just understand that to create a function we have this approach as well. So we create a variable, set it equal to the new function keyword, and then we're going to pass in the return statement along with the parameters, all in the parameters of this function. And to call this function and to get the return value, we can use this type of calling in the program. And then the fourth method is actually the arrow functions. So in the arrow functions, you do not even have to use the keyword function. You can simply set the name of the variable and set it equal to the parameters of the function, and then use a fat arrow symbol which is made with an is equal symbol and a greater than symbol, and then followed up by the curly brackets which are going to include the functionality of that function. Now there is another way of writing this fat arrow function, which is to simply use the name of the variable and then followed up with the parameters, and then after the fat arrow we only use or write the return statement of that function. So these were the different methods of creating and calling functions in JavaScript. Now there is another method of creative functions inside of objects which we are going to cover in this section of object. In this video, we are going to talk about the scopes of a variable in JavaScript. Now this is a topic that should have been covered at the start of this course, but we did not cover this topic because to learn details about this topic we needed to learn about functions and blocks. So let's start off with what a scope is. So basically a scope of a variable is nothing but the accessibility of a variable at a particular place. Now it defines where a variable can be accessed and where it cannot be accessed. Now if we were to simply talk about the different types of scope, we have the global scope and the local scope. And the local scope is further categorized into block scope and function scope. So we're going to start off with the global scope. So basically in global scope, the variable can be accessed from anywhere in the program, from inside the function and from inside the blocks as well. So if I were to simply create a variable on line number 5, so variable x is equals to some string, let's just call it Google, and then what we're going to do is that we're going to simply create a new function and we're going to call this function as myfunc, and in this function we're going to simply print out the value of the variable x. After that we're going to call this function and then we're going to create a new block. Now a block is represented by a pair of curly brackets. So within this block, we're also going to do console.log and print out the value of the variable x. So as you can see that this variable was created outside of any block or outside of any function, and we are trying to access this variable or the value of this variable within this function and within this block of code. So if I were to simply save this program and execute it, you can see that I was able to access this variable within function and within the block as well. But in order to better understand the global scope, we must understand the working of the local scope. So let's create a local variable. So we are going to simply remove this declaration of the variable, and then we are going to declare this variable inside of this function. And we are going to change this statement to tell us that this is inside the function. After coming outside the function, we are again going to try to access that variable. So now if I were to simply save this program and execute it, you can see that at first we did have the value inside the function, but we were not able to access this value outside of the function and we returned an error. Now this is because this variable x is now a local variable of this function myfunc. Now this means that this variable can only be accessed within this function and it cannot be accessed outside of this function. Now you can clearly see the difference between the global scope variables and the local scope variable. So let's now talk about the local scope variable or the types of the local scope variable. So we have the function scope and the block scope. But in order to understand the difference between the function scope and the block scope, we must know that we have other keywords to declare a variable. Now in the variable video, we learned that if you wanted to create a variable, we can use three keywords. So we have the var keyword, let keyword and the const keyword. Now in that video, we talked about that the const keyword is used to declare constants. Now these keywords, the let keyword and the const keyword, are also used for another purpose, and that is to declare the local variables. Now this is an additional purpose. Do not confuse it with these keywords only being able to declare the local keywords. Now do not get confused with these keywords only being able to create local variables. That is not the case. These keywords can be used to declare global variables as well. Anyways, now if we remove all of this code and then we created a function, so function myfunc, and within this function we are going to create a new block of code with the help of the curly brackets, and within these curly brackets, if we were to simply use the keyword let and then create a variable like x and set it equal to some string, and then we're going to come outside of only this block, not outside the function, and try to access the same variable x. After that we can come outside of the function and then simply call this function myfunc. Now you might think that okay, we were able to access the variable that was created inside the function, so we would be able to access this variable x as well. But if we simply run this program, you can see that we run into an error. Now this is because with the help of the let keyword, you can create variables that are only limited to a specific block of code. And as I've told you that a block of code is represented by a pair of curly brackets, this means that this x keyword can only be accessed within this block of code. So if I were to simply print out console.log x and remove that from here, then I would be able to get the output on my screen. So that was the block scope as compared to the function scope. Now the thing is that if you were to create a block scope variable with the help of a var keyword, you would not be able to do so. Now the var keyword does not support the block scope. However, it does support the function scope. So if I were to simply come out of this block and do console.log and then come out of this function and do console.log and execute my program, you can see that at first we did get the output from within the function. That means that the var keyword does not support the block scope, and we were not able to get the value of the x variable outside of the function, meaning that it is a local scope or the local variable of the myfunc function. Anyways, that was all about the scopes of variable. So again, we have the global scope and the local scope, and the local scope is further categorized in function scope and block scope. Now what if you want to map out the real world objects into the programming world? For example, an employee. Now an employee has an attribute like name, first name, last name, address, ID card and his salary. What if you want to map that particular employee into your programming world? How would you do that? That is a tough question. Well, the answer is pretty simple. You can do that with the help of objects in JavaScript. So in the next section, we are going to talk about objects in JavaScript. In this video, we are going to talk about the objects in the JavaScript programming language. Now, objects are considered to be the most important part of the JavaScript programming language. Now, if we were to talk about objects, then objects are those entities that are used to map the real world entities into the world of programming. Now, what do I mean by this? So basically, suppose that you have a cat. Now, a cat have multiple properties. It must have a name, it must have a species or breed, and it must have an age. Now, if you were to simply create a variable of that particular cat in your programming language, what can you do? Well, you might think that you can create an array to store all of the properties under the same name. So let's try doing that in our VS Studio Code. So let's create a variable named as cat and set it equal to an array, and then we are going to pass in the name as the first index. So we can type in something like snow, and then the second index is going to store his age. So the age is 8. After that, we can have the breed as Persian. Now this is a good approach. But what if you have a whole list of cats that you want to store in your program? Now there comes multiple problems. Suppose that we have multiple variables, and also suppose that one of the cats has a disease Alzheimer. So I've placed the disease as the second element about the attributes of the cat. Now what is the problem with this approach? So suppose that you're trying loops to access all of these arrays and you're using index values. So for all the other cats, the second index or the index value 1 would contain the age of the cat. But for this specific cat, it would contain the disease. Now this is going to cause us to run into errors. So that is why this is not a good approach. And what if we do not want to iterate through the whole array? Now what if we simply want to get the age of a specific cat? For that, what we would do is we would type the name cat and then follow it up with the index value of the age. But for this last cat, that index value is going to change. It's going to become 2. Now what is the issue with this approach? Now with this approach, the programmer should know the index values of the attributes of the particular object that we are trying to map out in the programming world. Now this is pretty tiresome. Now a better approach is giving some kind of names or aliases to all of these values. Like if we were able to simply say like age is equals to 8, and then over here if we were able to simply get the value using the name of the attribute which is age, then that would ease out things in a much better way. Now that is exactly what we get with the help of objects. In objects, you have something known as the key value pairs. Now what do we mean by the key value pairs? So suppose that we do not have all of these objects. We only have 3 attributes that we want to store under the name of cat. So the first attribute is actually the name. So we type in the name and then a colon to specify the value that is going to go under the name. And then we have the value as snow. After that, we have the value for age. So we type age, colon, and then the value of age of that particular cat. And then we have the breed. So breed, colon, and then the value of the breed which is Persian. So these are all 3 different key value pairs, with key being the name of the attribute and the value being the value of that attribute. Now let's create objects with the help of this information. So to create an object, first of all create a variable. So let's call it cat and then set it equal to curly brackets. Now within these curly brackets, you're going to type in the key value pairs just like I've done over here. What I can do is I can simply copy these key value pairs and paste them inside these curly brackets. So now we have an object of a cat. Now the best thing about using objects is that we can easily add on more and more attributes. Suppose that we have a disease. So let's type disease, put a colon and then give the value as just like that. Now it does not matter where I place this attribute disease. It can be placed over here or it can even be placed at the top of the list. Just like this. It would not matter. Because what I'm going to do is that when I'm going to access the attributes or the values of the cat or the properties of this particular cat, then I'm not going to be using the index values. Rather, I would be using the name of the attribute. From now on, I will not use the term name of the attribute. Rather, I would call this part as the key and this part as a value, because these attributes are mapped in the form of key and value pairs. Just like this. So we have the key separated from the value by a colon and then the value part. So this is the pair that we use to map out the attributes of a particular object into the world of programming. So now that we have created an object, let's talk about how to get the values from an object. Now to print out the values, I'm going to use the console.log function, and in here we are going to type the name of the variable or name of the object, follow it up with a dot operator and then the name of the key. So suppose that I want to print out the name of my cat, so I can simply go cat.name and then I can simply execute my program and I will get the value as snow. So if you have noticed, if we simply type out cat and then follow it up with a dot operator, we have all of these attributes listed right over here. We can even choose these attributes from this list. So suppose that I want to print out the disease, then I can simply do that by simply selecting disease and running my program, and it would show me that this cat has Alzheimer's. But this is not the only way to access the values of attributes of a particular object. We have multiple ways to access this. So starting off, I'm going to type in console.log and duplicate it a few more times. So the first way that we have already done is cat, follow it up with a dot operator, follow it up with the name of the key. After that, what we can do is we can type in the name of the object, follow it up with square brackets, and then pass in the name of the key in quotation marks. So we have breed. Now this method is very similar to accessing the values of an array. And the last method is, now suppose that you want to print the name of the cat. So for that, what we can do is we can store the name of the key, which is name, inside a variable, and then inside the console.log function we can simply pass in the name of the object, put square brackets, and within these square brackets we can simply pass on the variable which contains the name of the key. With this, if we were to simply save our program and execute it, you can see that we have the output for the age, for the breed, and for the name of the cat. So these were the different methods through which you can access the values of the attributes of a particular object. Now suppose that you wanted to get the information about an object. For that, what you can do is you can simply type in console.log, and within these brackets you can simply paste in the name of the object like this. So save the program and execute it, and you can view the complete object onto the console just like that. And if you want to iterate through the complete object, or if you want to iterate through the key values of an object, what you can do is you can use a for in loop. To use a for in loop, simply use the keyword for, follow it up with round brackets, then a variable name. So I'm just going to call this one as variable x, and then the keyword in. After that, you're going to type the name of the object, which is cat. Now within the curly brackets, you're going to simply go console.log, follow it up with the name of the object, follow it up with square brackets, and within these square brackets we are going to simply type in x, save the program. Now what this program is going to do is that it is going to take all of the keys and store them inside this variable x, and after that we're going to use that key name to get the values or the attributes of that object cat. So if we simply save our program and execute it, so you can see that all of the attributes values have been printed onto the terminal. So that is how you can iterate through the complete list of attributes of an object. So in the previous video, we talked about the for in loop to iterate over the keys of an object. In this video, we are not going to talk about objects, but rather we are going to talk about the difference between the for in loop and the for off loop. So create a new file with the for in and for off loop, and in this file, what we're going to do is that we're going to first create a string. So here I have my string, and then I'm going to use the for in loop. So the keyword for followed up by the variable x in string. After that, I'm going to simply go with console.log and print out the variable x. So if I do this and execute a program, so on the terminal, I can clearly see that the index values of the characters of the string have been printed onto the terminal. Now, if I were to use these index values to get the characters, what I can do is I can come right over inside this console.log statement and pass in my string array. Now strings also work as an array. Now we will talk about strings in the string manipulation video, but for now just understand this, that strings work as arrays. So if you were to simply take string as an array and then pass in my variable x and print and run my program, I would get the characters printed onto the terminal. So this is how you can use this for in loop to actually iterate through an object. So let's create an object. So here I have my object, which actually represents the details about a person whose name is John Doe. So what I can do is I can use this for in loop to iterate through the keys of this object. So I simply need to change this string to object1, and then instead of printing the string array, I can simply print out the value stored inside this x variable. So now if I were to simply clear up my terminal and run the program, so you can see that I was able to print all of the keys of this object. Now I can use these keys to get the values by simply typing object1 and then putting square brackets around the x variable. After that, I would be able to get the values of these respective keys. Now I can print both of them in the same line by using x, comma, and then putting a colon and then another comma. After that, if I were to clear my terminal and run the program, I would get the key value pairs onto the terminal. Now there is another loop that we can use, which is the for off loop. So instead of this in keyword, we're going to go over the off keyword. Now this for off loop cannot be applied on objects. If I were to simply run this program, or if I were to simply print out the value stored inside the x variable and then run the program, I would be met with an error, because this for off cannot be iterated over an object, but however, it can be iterated over a string. So if I simply change this object1 to string and then run the program, then I would be able to get all of the characters of the string. So that is the difference between the for in loop and the for of loop. So you can conclude from the output on the terminal that the for of loop actually gets us the characters rather than the indexes that we get with the for in loop. Anyways, that was the difference between the for in loop and the for of loop. So starting the objects where we left them, we're going to now talk about how to add attributes into an already created object. So adding attributes into an object is really simple. Now it's almost similar to accessing the values of an object. Now suppose that we want to add an attribute within this cat object, which is going to be its color. We can easily do that by simply typing in cat followed up by with a dot operator and then typing in the name of the key that we want to add. So since we want to add in the color, so simply type in cat.color and then set it equal to the value that you want to provide to this particular key. So the color can be black. After that, to confirm that this attribute has been added, we can simply go with console.log and pass in our cat object and then execute our program. And just like that, you can see in the terminal that our attribute color has been added to this object. Now we can do the same exact thing with the help of square brackets. So simply type in the name of the object cat, follow it up with square brackets, and then within the quotation marks type in the name of the key. So the key is going to be color. After that, set it equal to the value that you want to provide to this key, which is black. Then again use the console.log to print out the object, clear the terminal, and then run our program. And we have the same exact output and the attribute color has been added to this object. Now after we have learned how to add an attribute, let's talk about how to delete an attribute. So let's try and delete this attribute of disease. So if you want to delete an attribute from an object, what we need to do is that we need to use the keyword delete, follow it up with the attribute. And how to access that attribute is very simple. Simply type in cat and then the attribute that you want to delete. After that, we're going to simply get the output using the console.log function, save our program and execute the program. And as you can see on the terminal that the disease attribute has been deleted while we have added the color attribute to this object. And then you can use the square bracket approach to delete the attribute as well. So simply put square brackets over here, type the attribute that you want to delete within quotation marks, save the program and execute it. And as you can see from the output that the disease attribute has been deleted from this cat object. So that is how you can add attributes to an object and how you can delete attributes from an object. Now let's talk about something that is quite advanced, which is the nesting of objects. So I'm going to remove this cat object as well. And then here I'm going to create an object of a person. So this is our person object. So it has the following attributes. We have the first name, last name, age, profession and cats owned. So what if we want to tell the name of the cat within this object? So we can simply type in cats followed up with a colon and then create another object. Now within this object we are going to have key value pairs which are going to be the name of the cat. So we can simply type in cat1 and then give it a value which is going to be snow, cat2 which is going to be flakes. After that we have the third cat which is going to be galaxy. Now you might be wondering how to access these names of the cats. Well, it's pretty simple. So first off, you type in the name of the outermost object which is person. After that you follow it up with a dot operator and then the name of the second object which is cats. Then a dot operator and then the name of the attribute or the key of the attribute that you want to fetch, which in this case can be cat1. After that, wrap this whole statement inside a console.log function and then run our program. And as you can see on the terminal that we get the output as snow. So if I were to simply change this cat1 to cat3, we would get the output as galaxy. So this is how you can create nested objects and this is how you can access the values of those nested objects. Now you can also use square brackets instead of these dot operators. So you can type in person square bracket cats within quotation marks, followed up with another pair of square brackets, and within quotation marks you can type in cat number 3. And then run the program and we would get the output as galaxy. And you can even access the nested object like this. You can use the square bracket approach first and then you can use the dot operator approach second. Anyways, what if we had another object in front of cat3, something like this. And we can even access the disease attribute of cat3 by simply putting another dot operator and then typing in disease. So now if I execute this program, we have the value Alzheimer onto the terminal. So that is how you can work with nested objects. Now this nesting can also be done with the help of arrays. So basically you can even place in arrays in the value part of the key value pairs. So suppose that we have cats and in here we create an array and each element of an array contains the name of a cat. So it's snow, comma, flakes, comma, galaxy. Now to access the elements of this array, what you have to do is that you need to type in person, then cats. After that, you're going to take another square bracket and type in the index value of the element that you want to fetch. So if I want to fetch flakes, I would simply type in 1 over here. So now if I save my program and execute it, I will get the result as flakes. So that is how you can have arrays inside your objects as well. And then the nesting can also be done for an infinite number of times. So this array can have objects and that object can have other arrays. So the nesting is actually infinite. Anyways, that was all about this video. In this video, we have learned how to add attributes, delete attributes, and how to perform nesting inside an object. In this video, we are going to talk about the methods of an object, how to create them and how to use them. After that, we will talk about what's the difference between methods versus functions. So let's talk about how to create a method of an object. So suppose that we have the first name in a different attribute and the last name in a different attribute, just like we have in this person object, and we want to print out the full name. So what we can do is that we can create a new attribute, type it as full name, put a colon, and after the colon, we can create a function. We don't have to name it anything, as the function would be called as full name. After that, we're going to open up the curly brackets of the function, and in here we're going to simply return this dot first name, which is the key, plus an empty string, plus this dot last name. This keyword only means that it is going to search for this fname attribute within this person object, nothing more than that. After that, we can simply go outside the object and print out console.log and type in the name of the object, which is person, followed up by the newly created attribute, which is full name. So now if I were to simply run this program, I would get that this is a function named as full name, but why did I not get the complete full name of this person, Brandon Ike? Now this is because full name is a function and we did not use the round brackets which represent that we are calling that a function. So simply place in the round brackets and then re-execute the program, and we will get the full name of this person, which is Brandon Ike. So this is how you can create a method of an object. Now, why am I calling this a method and why is this not a function? Well, let's talk about that later on in this video, but for now we're going to learn about how to attach a function into an object which does not already have that function. So let me just remove this full name attribute entirely from this object, come outside of the object, and then use the object's name, then put a dot operator, and then the name of the function that we want to give, which is full name, set it equal to the function keyword, and return the same thing, this dot first name plus empty string plus this dot last name. Now this is going to work exactly the same way as the previous video in which we added an attribute to an object. So simply go with console.log method and then type in person.fullname and follow it up with round brackets and then execute the program, and we get the same exact output, which is Brandon Ike. So that is how you can create methods of an object, and that is how you can also attach a method to an object if it does not already have one. So let's talk about what is the difference between methods and objects and why did I name this function as a method rather than calling it a function. Now you can see that I've written that methods are associated with objects while functions are independent of the objects. So in simple words, all of the functions that we use with the name of the object followed up by a dot operator are known to be methods of that particular object, just like we have console.log right over here. So console is the object whose method is log, which is used to print something out or log something out onto the console. Now if you were to create a function rather than a method that prints us the full name of this object, then we have to do function keyword followed up by the name of the function, and in here we have to return the person.firstname plus an empty string plus person.lastname. Now you can see that this function full name is not a part of this person object. Rather, we are accessing the person object to get the first name and the last name. So now if I were to call this full name function, I would simply type the name of this function as full name and not use the name of the object. So now if I call this function inside console.log, then I would get the output as Brandon Ike. Now let's take a function that does not have anything to do with an object. So let's just simply add in two parameters within this full name. So the first one is going to be the first name, the second one is going to be the last name. After that, let's just simply return first name plus an empty string plus last name. After that, when we are calling this full name function, we need to provide in the first name and the last name. So the first name can be John and the last name can be Doe. And now if I execute this program, I have the output as John Doe. So as you can see that this function has nothing to do with the person object. Again, functions are independent of the objects while methods are actually functions, but they are associated with an object, and that is the main difference between functions and methods. So in this video, we are going to talk about the prototype that we have in JavaScript. Now to better demonstrate this prototype, we need to know what this keyword does. So as you can see on the screen that we have an object of person that contains the first name, last name and age. After that, we want to create a method inside this object that returns us the complete name of this person. Now within this function, I simply want to return first name plus my last name. But as soon as I select the first name, you can see that this keyword has been placed right before that. Now what is this keyword? So basically this keyword is a reference to the object itself. So if I hover over this keyword, you can see that we have the same object but the name has been changed to this instead of person1. Again, this keyword is used for referencing the same object. So currently it is saying that you need to fetch the first name of the same object in which you are working. After that, I would simply type this dot last name. Now this was working with objects, but this video is concerned with prototype. So what is a prototype? Basically, if you have a lot of people that you want to create objects of, and they contain the same template, they contain first name, last name, age and this function to get their full name. So one approach is that you can take this code snippet and duplicate it multiple times, but that is not a good and efficient approach. So the other approach is to create a template and then create objects upon that template. Now this template that I'm talking about can be created with the help of prototypes. Now prototype by default is a property of everything in JavaScript. Now what do I mean by this? Basically, everything that we do in JavaScript, may it be strings, numbers, arrays, objects, classes, whatever we create, are all known to be objects. And every object has this attribute known as prototype, which defines the attributes of that particular object. Now, if you were to simply create a function calling it person, and this function takes in the attributes to be stored as first name, last name and age. So I'm just going to create the parameters as first name, last name and then age. After that, within this function, I'm going to define the attributes of my person template or the person prototype. Now that can be used with the reference of this particular object. So the reference is given by this keyword. After that, we need to follow it with the name of the attribute that we want to provide. So I want to actually call this one as first name. After that, I'll set it equal to the value that is coming inside the arguments. Similarly, I would use this dot last name and set it equal to the value that is coming inside the arguments as well. And lastly, I have this dot age, which is equals to age. Now just like that, if I create a new variable and set it equal to this function, then that variable would be considered an object of this person. After that, I also want to create this get full name function. For that, I would just simply call this one as this dot get full name and set it equal to function, which does the exact same thing. It returns this dot first name plus an empty string plus this dot last name, just like that. After that, I'm just going to remove or actually comment out this object so that we can only work with this prototype that we have created. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create multiple variables and map them to this prototype. So I'm just going to create a variable, call this one as p1, set it equal to our function person, and then I'm going to pass in my arguments. So John for the first name, Doe for the last name, and I want the age to be 20. But as you can see that this was a way of calling the function. But this time around, this is not only a function but a prototype. Now we are going to use the new keyword as well. Now the new keyword basically tells the program that okay, we are now trying to create a new object of this particular template, class or prototype. After that, I'm just going to duplicate this line and I'm going to change the details as well. Now that we have created these three objects p1, p2 and p3 based upon the template of the person, we can actually access them individually with the same approach that we do with objects. So if I want to get the first name or the last name of the first person, then I would simply go with console.log and I would type in p1 dot and then first name, just like that. After that, if I want to get the complete name of person 2, then I can simply go like console.log and then I can print out p2 dot get full name, and this is a function, so I'll type in the parentheses. And if I want to get only the age of the person 3, then I would type in console.log and p3 dot age. Now if I save my code and execute it, you can clearly see we have the first name of the first person, complete name of the second person, and the age of the third person. So basically, with the help of this prototype that we have just created, we can create infinite number of objects according to our requirements. So that is a great way of being efficient and saving a time and a lot of code as well. Now if you again go over some of the key points, then the this keyword is used to refer to the same object, whereas the new keyword is used to create a new instance or a new object of that particular class or object. Now if you're coming from OOP background, which is object oriented programming, then you must be aware of this new keyword. Now this new keyword is used to create an object of a class. A class is a template and object is the object mapped to that template. Anyways, in the next video we are going to talk about classes in JavaScript. However, classes are not that much used in JavaScript. In this video, we are going to talk about classes in JavaScript. Now if you have a OOP programming background, then you might be familiar with classes and objects. So in the previous video of prototype, we created this prototype, but there is a better way of doing that, and that is through classes. Even though classes are not that much used in JavaScript because of prototype, but still you must know the fundamentals of programming, especially when it comes to classes, because classes are used to implement object-oriented programming. So I'm going to simply map this person object into a person class. For that, I'm just going to comment this out and then come right over here, and this time around we are going to create a class. Again, a class is nothing but a template on which objects are created. Now to create a class, you have the keyword as class followed up by the name of the class, and it is a convention to start the name of the class with capitalized first character. After that, you do not need to put round parentheses as the class does not take any arguments. However, when you're creating an object of that particular class, you do pass in some arguments, but they are captured with the help of a constructor. Now let's talk about constructor in a little while. Anyways, after the name of the class, you simply put curly brackets and then you type in the data that you want to store inside that particular class. Now the very first thing that you must create in a class is its constructor. Now what is a constructor? Constructor is a method that is executed when an object is created of this particular class. So now to create a constructor, you actually need to use the keyword as constructor. After that, you simply create a round parenthesis and then curly brackets, and within these curly brackets you type in the body of the constructor. Now let's talk about the round parenthesis of the constructor method. Now the constructor method is used to give values to the attributes of that particular class. For example, when we created this person prototype, we had the attributes as first name, last name and age. And whenever we created the object based upon this prototype, we had passed in the values for those attributes right inside this round parenthesis. So we are going to define that in the constructor as well. So this class person is going to take in the values as first name, last name and the age. After that, we want to assign these values to the attributes of this particular class. Now first of all, we are going to define the attributes of this class by using the this keyword. So the first attribute is going to be the first name, and we are going to set its value equal to the first name that is coming from the argument. After that, it's pretty much similar for the last name and for the age as well. Just like that. So now in the constructor we have given values to the attributes of this particular class. After that, we want to create this method which was used for getting the full name. Now to create this function, you actually need to come out of the constructor and create a function. But when you're creating functions or methods inside a class, you do not need to use the name or the keyword function. You simply have to type the name of the function itself. So the function was get full name. After that, you simply type in round parentheses and then curly brackets. And this is going to return this dot first name plus concatenation with this empty string plus this dot last name. Just like that. After that, we have the template or the class of person prepared. Now let's create objects based upon or mapped upon this particular class. So we're going to call this one as person1 is equals to new keyword. After that, the class name, which is person, and then we're going to pass in the arguments for the attributes. So it is going to be John Doe and the age is going to be 20, just like that. After that, with the help of this variable, which is person1, we can access this function get full name. So it's per1 dot get full name, and then we are going to wrap this in the console.log method. Once that is done, we can save our code and execute it, and we will get the output as John Doe. However, what if we want to get the first name or the last name? Well, we can do this. We can go for person1 dot age and we would get the age onto the terminal. However, this is not a good approach. Basically, when you're working with classes or programming language in general, what you want to do is that you want to create getter methods to get the values of particular attributes and setter methods to set the values of those particular attributes. And then you want to eradicate the access to those particular attributes by themselves. What do I mean by this? Basically, if I want to change the age, then I would create a method which is going to be named as setAge. And this method is just going to take this .age and set it equal to the age that has been passed inside the arguments of this function, just like that. And if I want to get this value of age, then I would create a method known as getAge, which is only going to return us our this.age. After that, if I want to get the age of this particular object, person1, then I would simply type console.log. After that, I would type person1.getAge, just like that. And then if I run my program, I get the output as 20. Now you might be wondering, why do go through the hassle of creating a separate method as getAge when we can just go like console.log and simply type in person1.age, and then if I run my program, I get the output as 20. Well, the reason for this is that whenever you're working with classes or modularity, you want to isolate the direct access of attributes, and you only want to give that access to particular methods which can then be used to set those values and get those values. Now what do I mean by this? First of all, let's talk about how to restrict the access to attributes. So if I were to simply create a variable inside the class with the name starting from underscore, like underscore first name, underscore last name, and underscore age. When I do this, and then when I just go console.log person1.age, which previously actually gave us an output, now when I run this code, I get the output as undefined. Now this is because the access to these variables or attributes is now restricted. Now, if I simply come over to getAge, and this time around I'm going to return this._age. And if I duplicate this line, console.log, and instead of using age, I am going to use the method as getAge. So now if I run this code, you can clearly see that if we try to access it directly, we get an error or undefined value. But if we try it through the getAge method, we have the value as 20. So meaning that nothing has a direct access to these attributes other than the functions that we clearly define. Similarly, if I want to set the age, I would type in this._age. After that, I'm going to set a separate age value. So person1.setAge, and in here I'm going to pass the value as 25. After that, we can confirm this by using console.log person1.getAge and then round parenthesis, and now when I run this program, I get the age value as 25 while it is still showing undefined when I try to access this directly. Now with the help of this underscore and then the variable name, we have actually achieved encapsulation, which means that we cannot directly access the attributes of a particular class. So that is why classes can be much more beneficial than using normal prototypes. Well, it all depends upon the requirements of your project. Anyways, after this, let's talk about static methods inside classes. Now the static methods are those methods that you cannot access with the help of the object of a particular class. They can only be accessed with the help of class themselves. Now what do I mean by this? Let's talk about it with the help of an example. So let's first talk about how to create a static method. Now to create a static method, you're going to use the keyword as static, after that the name of the function that you want to create. For example, if I want to greet a person, then I'm going to call this one as greet, and then I'm just going to return a string that says hello person. After that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create an object of this person. So variable p1 standing for person1 is equals to new person. After that, I'm going to call this one as John Doe, and the age is going to be 20, just like before. After that, I'm just going to do console.log and p1 dot and try to access this greet method, greet. Now if I run this program, I get the output as an error. So if I look at the error, we can clearly see that it says that it is a type error, that greet is not a function, where we can see that we do have the function named as greet. Well, this is because it is a static method that cannot be accessed with the help of the objects of a particular class. However, it can be accessed with the name of the class itself. For example, the name was person, so I'm just going to type here person.greet. And now if I run this program, you can see that I get the output as hello person. So we can say that if there was precedence, then this function has a precedence equal to the class. But what if we want to greet a specific person, or we want to greet a person according to an object that has been created of that particular class? Well, for that we are going to pass in the reference to the object. Now how can we do that? So in this argument of this greet method, I'm going to pass the reference as ref. After that, I'm going to simply say hello plus reference dot first name. And after that, when I'm calling this person.greet method, I'm going to pass in my object, that is going to be p1. Now if I run my code, I get the output as hello John. If I want to simply format this output a little better, I'm going to put a space right over here and then rerun the code, and I get the output as hello John. So that is how you can create static methods that can only be accessed with the help of the class name. After that, even though I had no intention to talk about the OOP programming language or the concepts of OOP, but still it is pretty useful to know about inheritance. So let's talk about inheritance with the help of classes. So as you can see on the screen now that I have a class of car, and it is a constructor that takes in the brand of the car. After that, I have this method name as present that actually tells that I have a dash brand car. After that, what if I want to create another class that is model? Now obviously this model has to be linked with its parent, that is car. So basically what I want to do is that I want this model class to have all the properties of the car class as well, without explicitly defining them within this model class. So basically we are going to use the property of inheritance. Just like a child has attributes of his parent, this model class is going to have the attributes of its parent class, which is going to be car. Now for this we need to explicitly define that this class model actually extends or is a further part of the class car, just like that. After that, we are going to create the constructor for this model class. So the very first thing is going to be the argument that we want to pass to the parent class, which was brand. After that, I'm going to type in the arguments that I want to store within this class model. So it's going to be model. Now the very first thing that we're going to do inside this constructor is we're not going to do like this dot brand is equals to brand. Instead, we want to pass this brand value to the parent class's constructor. For that we're going to call in the super keyword, which is actually a method, and in that we're going to pass in brand. Now what this method is going to do is that it is going to take this brand, pass it to the constructor of the parent class, and that constructor is going to set its value equal to this dot underscore brand is equals to brand. After that, in the constructor of the model class, we're going to simply set this dot underscore model is equals to model that we get in the argument. After that, let's return the exact model with the brand of the car. So for this we are going to create a method named as show, and what this method is going to do is that it is going to simply return this dot present, which is basically going to access the value that came from the parent because of inheritance. After that, I simply want to add in another string that and it is a, and then this dot underscore model, just like that. After that, I'm going to come outside of this class model and I'm going to create a new object. So I'm just going to call this one as car1 is equals to new and model. Now in here I'm going to first pass in the brand, which was Ford. After that, for the model I'm just going to call this one as Mustang. Once that is done, I'm going to go console.log and then the output value from the show method. Now if I bring up my terminal, clear it up and run my code, I get the output that I have a Ford and it is a Mustang. And from this output you can clearly deduce that our class model was able to access the attributes of the class car. Anyways, that was a very basic introduction of inheritance. And that also brings us to the end of this video, to the end of classes in JavaScript. You have come a long way. The next step is to learn how to manipulate data that we get inside a program. Because when you're working with live application, you're getting large amounts of data from a large number of users, and you need to be able to manipulate that data so that you can only use the useful data. So in this section, we are going to talk about manipulations in JavaScript. Hello, in this video, we're going to talk about everything there is to talk about strings. So we're going to start off by creating a variable and naming it string and then storing a string inside this, like hello world. Now we're going to start off by the concatenation operator of adding two strings. So concatenation simply means adding two or more strings. So if I were to simply create a new variable calling it string2 and setting it equal to welcome to linuxhint. and then I want to store the combination of both of these strings into a third variable, then I can simply do that by simply creating a variable 3, naming it string3, and then putting string 1, then using the plus operator or the addition operator, and after that I can simply type in string 2. And then what I can do is I can simply print the string 3 using the console.log function. So if I run this program, you can see that I get hello world, welcome to linuxhint. This means that both of these strings have been concatenated and stored inside the string3 variable. Now after that, suppose that we have a variable called name, which contains the name John Doe. After that, we want to use the console.log function to greet this John Doe user like hello, and then we want to print John Doe. Well, we can easily do that with the help of the concatenation operator, which is the plus symbol. After that, we can simply type in the name variable. Now this is going to do the same exact thing, and this is going to concatenate both of these values. But what if this space was not here and we want to print a space between hello and the name? If you don't get what I'm trying to say, simply run the program, and as you can see on the output that there is no space or gap between the hello and the John. For this you can add in another concatenation and then use an empty string. You simply type in quotation marks and then put a space between them. Now this is going to add in a space between the hello and the name, which is John Doe. So this is how you can perform string concatenation in JavaScript. After the string concatenation, let's talk about how to put quotation marks in a string. So what do I mean by putting quotation marks? So let's take an example. So I have this variable called string, and in this I want to simply say hello and then John Doe. But I want this John Doe to be placed with quotation marks around it, and after that I want to say welcome to linuxhint. Now if I were to simply put quotation marks like this, we are going to run into some kind of errors. So as you can see in the editor that there are squiggly lines saying that there is an error. Now why is that so? Now basically if we look at our string, this quotation marks defines that this is the start of the string, and after that these quotation marks actually represent the end of a string. So any text after these quotation marks is taken to be the name of the variable, but that variable name cannot have a space in between them. So that is why we have this squiggly line. After that, this quotation mark represent again the start of a string, and this quotation mark represent the end of a string. So this is a severe problem, and we want to overcome this problem, but we can do that easily with the help of using the different type of quotation marks. Now what do I mean by this? So basically, let me just remove the center quotation marks. So basically, I have told you that we can create strings with the help of either double quotation marks or with the help of single quotation mark. So let me just type a string over here as well. So if we are using double quotation marks to create a string, then within those double quotation marks, we can use single quotation marks to define or to put emphasis on a certain word. And if we are using single quotation marks on the outside to define a string, then in between the string we can easily use double quotation marks to put emphasis on a particular string. Now with this approach we can easily go with console.log method and then pass in our string variable 1 and even the string variable 2. So let me clear up my terminal and then let me run the code. Now you can clearly see that first we have hello, then John Doe in single quotation marks, welcome to linuxhint. And for the second row, we have hello and then John Doe in double quotation marks, welcome to linuxhint. So that is how you can put double quotation mark or single quotation marks onto the output of a particular string. Now what if we want double quotation marks of a string that is made with the help of double quotation marks? Well, we can even do that. For that, what we need to do is that we need to do something which is known as escaping characters from a string. So if we simply put backslash before the double quotation mark and backslash over here as well, then this is going to tell the interpreter that okay, this backslash means that the next character is going to be escaped. It is not going to be taken as something with a predefined meaning, rather it is to be displayed as it is. With the help of this, if I run this program, you can see that the first row now contains double quotation marks. So that is how you can put quotation marks in between a string. After that, let's talk about how to compare strings. Now for this, we are going to simply change and take some simple strings like hello, hello, and let's take another string and let's put it equal to hello as well. Now we know that both of these strings are equal. Now we can easily confirm that with the help of the if statement. So we can simply type if string is equals to string2 and let me change this variable name to string2. If this is the case, then simply print out both of the strings are same. So if I run my program, we get that both of the strings are same. But this is not always the case, and using this double equality operator is not the proper way to compare a string. So what is the proper way? Now to compare strings in JavaScript, you have the strict equality operator. Now what do I mean by this? So suppose that I have taken a string with the character being 8, and then I have taken a numeric value 8, and if I were to simply compare these would not be equal to each other, as one of them is string and the other one is a number. But if I run this program, I will get the output as both of these strings are same. So why is that so? Basically what is happening is that the interpreter is taking the values of these and not considering their type at all. So taking or comparing strings with the help of the double equality operator is not the correct way to do it. In such cases where you want to check the value as well as the type of the variable before comparison or between the comparison, you have to use the strict equality operator. Now a strict equality operator is represented by a triple equal sign. With this, if I run this program, and let me just add in the else clause, and in this else clause we're just simply going to print out console.log that the statements are not equal. After that, if I clear up the terminal and run my program, you can see that the output is now that the statements are not equal. Again, this is because of the strict equality operator, which not only checks the value but it even checks the type of the variable that is being used in the comparison. So the better approach to compare strings is by the strict equality operator. Now that we have gone through the objects and classes in the previous section, we know what a constructor is. Now there is another way of creating a string, and that is with the new string constructor. So basically create a variable, name it anything that you want, and set it equal to the new keyword followed up by the string object. Now this string object must have a capital S. Now this is the constructor of the string object, and when you want to place a value inside this variable that is constructed by the string object, then simply place that value inside the parameters inside the arguments of this constructor. So I can simply type my string right over here like hello world. Now this is going to create our string. So we can do console.log and pass in our variable a, and it would be presented onto the terminal that it is a string object with the value hello world. And yes, with the help of this constructor, you create an object of the string class. Now we can check the exact same thing with the help of the type of operator. So in the console.log, simply type in type of and then follow it up with the variable a. After that, save the program and execute it, and you can see that we get the type as object. So basically this variable is now an object based upon the string object that is pre-built into JavaScript. Now after learning about the string object, let's talk about something that has to do with operators. Now we have used the concatenation operator to basically concatenate the two strings into a third variable. But what if we were not using the concatenation operator? We were using arithmetic operators. For that, simply create a variable named as str1 and store a numeric value inside it in the form of string. So we can type in 15 enclosed within quotation marks. After that, simply create another variable str2 with a name number1 and then set it equal to a numeric value that is not enclosed between quotation marks. After that, if I were to do simply console.log and in here I do str1, then the concatenation operator, then num1. What this is going to do is that it is going to print us out the number 153. Now this is because it is taking the num1 variable as a string and concatenating it in the 15 string. But if this was any other operator like the multiplication operator and save the program and execute it, we would get the result as 45. For this operator, it has taken the str1 variable as the number. The same goes for the division operator, and the same goes for the subtraction operator and for the modulus as well. So that is the interaction of a string and a number with the help of arithmetic operators. After this, we are going to cover some of the pre-built methods that we get with the string object that we can apply on strings to perform various type of manipulations or string manipulation. But before getting started with string manipulation, we must know why string manipulation is important. Basically, whenever you're creating a web application or any other native application, you must know how to manipulate strings, because all of the data that is coming to your server or that is coming to the client application is in the form of JSON, which is nothing but a JavaScript object notation in the form of strings. So you must know how to manipulate that string, you must know how to extract the data from that string, how to perform equality or equality checks on those strings. So let's get started with the first pre-built method. For this we are going to be needing a string variable, so I'm just going to create a variable, name it string1, give it some type of mixed value. By mixed I mean with mixed case values. So hello and world. So you can see in the string that the H and the W is capital. So the first method that we are going to cover is the to lowercase string. Well, it does exactly what it sounds like. It converts this entire string into a lowercase string. To apply this, simply type the name of the variable that holds your string like string1 and then use the to lowercase method and simply put round brackets at the end of it. After that, we need to store the result of this to lowercase method into our variable, or we can just simply pass it onto the console.log function. So we are going to pass it inside the console.log function. So now if I run my program, I get the string hello world all in lowercase. In opposite to lowercase, we have another method which is to uppercase and it converts the string to all uppercase selectors. So if I run my program now, my hello world string has been converted to all uppercase characters. Now after the case conversion, let's talk about finding a particular index value if that holds a specific character. So let's first talk about getting a character out of a specific index value. So we have this method known as the character add. So let's simply type console.log and in here I'm going to type my variable that holds the string, that is string1, and then use the method character add. After that, in the arguments we're going to pass in the index value. So suppose that we want the character placed at the index value of 6. So I simply type that in and run my program. We get the character as capital W. So this was the character at the index value 6. After that, we have a method that tells us the index of the first occurrence of a character. So suppose that I want to get the index of this E, then I can simply pass in this character within quotation marks as the argument of this function, and then if I run this program, I get the index value 1. This means that this small e is placed at the index value 1. But let's try that with the L. So now if I run my program, you can see that I get the index value as 2. However, if we look closely at our string, there are 3 instances of the character L. So we can be clear, this index of method only returns the first occurrence of the letter passed in the argument. Other than this, we have another method very similar to the index of, which is the last index of. Now this method returns us the last occurrence of a specific character. So let's just go with the character L and run our program. This time around we get the last occurrence of the character L, which is at the index value 9. After this, what if you want to find a specific substring or the existing of a specific substring or a character from their string? So for that we have the method known as the search method. So simply type console.log and in here I'm going to pass in the variable string1 and then the search method. And in the argument, I'm going to pass in if my string contains the character capital H. So if I run my program, I get the output as 0. Now this 0 means the index on which this character H or capital H is placed at. So if we get a number like this one, this means that there exists a character like this in the string. Now what if we wanted to search for a whole substring like the hello? So if I type that in the search method and then execute my program, I would get the index 0 again. Now this is because the starting of this substring is placed at the index value 0. Now let's just change it so that we get a different output to world. So now I get the index value as 6. Now this 6 means that the world or the character W starts from the index value 6. But what if I search the substring world, but this time around with a different case, like I search the world with all lowercase? I would get the output as -1. Now this means two things. Number 1, if the output is a negative value, this means that the substring that you search for does not exist in the actual string. Number 2, this search method is a case sensitive searching method. So if you want to search for a specific substring, that would include all of the case settings of that substring must exist in the actual string. Now for this kind of search where you want to ignore the case sensitivity, with the search method or the match method that we're going to cover right after this one, you can use something known as the flags. So to use the flag, simply remove the quotation marks from the substring that you want to search and put forward slashes. Now after the last forward slash, what you can do is you can put the flag. So the flag G would mean that search for all of the instances even if you find the first instance. After that, we have the I flag. I flag basically means to ignore the case sensitivity, and this is exactly what we want to do. So if I simply put the I flag with our substring, which now is in the form of a regular expression. Now this is no longer a string, it's a regular expression. And then I run my program, I would get the starting index of my substring without the case sensitivity, which is the index value 6. After that, like I mentioned previously, that we are going to use the match method. Now the match method is pretty much similar to the search method except for the return value. So to better understand this, let's just quickly run our program and we get this array as the output. So it shows you what it was searching for and what it found. So it found the string world, which starts at the index value 6. The original string which was input to this match method was this, and if you wanted it to create groups based on a certain attribute, then they would be displayed over here, but we are not going to cover groups in this video. So that was the match method. Now the match method can be used with regular expression or with just simple string. So if I were to simply write world in the form of string and rerun the program, I would get the value as null, meaning that this match method is also case sensitive and it returns null if the substring is not found in the actual string. Now very similar to the search method and the match method is the includes method. So it is used for almost the same purpose, we just change the keyword of the method name to includes. So we just run the program and we get the output in the form of booleans. So the output is false because it is also case sensitive and it did not find the substring world in all lowercase. So if I simply change my substring to world with a capital W, then it is going to return us true. So we have ourselves the conclusion that the includes method returns booleans, the match method returns arrays, and the search method returns the first index of that substring. Now we are going to talk about the last two methods that we are going to cover in this video. Now those methods are the start with and the ends with method. For that we are going to take a longer string. So we have our string that says hello world, this is linuxhint. And then we are going to use console.log function twice, and in the first log method we are going to simply go with string 1 dot start with method. Now this starts with method is going to set the first word of the string. Now we can check for capital H or the word hello. So now if I execute my program, you can see that I get the output as true and true, which means that this string starts with the character H and it starts with the word hello. Similarly, we can use the other method, which is the ends with method. So this ends with method is going to check whether a string ends on a particular character or ends on a particular word. So if I were to simply change this ends with method argument to T and the word to linuxhint and then execute my program, again on the terminal I would get true and true, which means that this string ends on T and ends on the word linuxhint. Now let's check whether the string ends on a different character. So let's check whether it ends on a capital H or the substring on which it is ending be int. After that, let's also type in the starts with method. After that, let's also check whether this string starts with the character small s or starts with the word HEL. So if I clear up my terminal and execute my program, you can see that for the first console.log we get the value as false, meaning that this string does not end on a capital H, but however it ends on the letters I and T. After that, I get the output as false. This false means that this string does not start with a small s, however it does start with the letters capital H, E, L, N. So that was the first part of the string manipulation topic. So in the second part, we're going to go in more detail about other methods that we can use to manipulate string. But in that video, we're going to learn how to create substrings with the help of different methods from an actual string. So the part 1 of all about strings was getting a little longer, so that is why I have divided this into two parts. So let's continue where we left off and let's talk about the next method that we get with the string manipulations. So the next method is actually replace. So basically we can take a substring or find a substring from a string and then replace it for another substring. So to use this method, we're going to create another variable and just going to call it string2 and set it equal to string1.replace. And then in the brackets, we're going to pass in the substring that we want to replace. So what if I want to replace this linuxhint? So I'm just going to type in linuxhint right over here. After that, I'm going to put a comma while staying inside the arguments, and then I'm going to pass in the value that I want to place in place of this linuxhint. So it can be JavaScript. After that, I can simply do console.log and pass in my string2 variable. So you can see that in the output we get hello world, this is JavaScript. But what if we did console.log for string1 and string2 as well? So we have the modified string JavaScript in string2 variable and the original string in string1 variable. So we can conclude that this replace method does not affect the original string, rather it provides or returns a new string. Now while staying in the replace method, I'm going to change my string a little. So I'm going to type in hello world, and again world, and then I'm going to say this is linuxhint. Now why did I do this? So basically I want to replace, or I want to see what if I want to replace all of the worlds from this string. So now if I run my program, you can see that I get the output as hello universe followed up by world, this is linuxhint. So from this we can easily conclude that only the first substring has been replaced with the word universe. But what if I want to replace all of the substrings equal to world with universe? For that I would have to convert this string into a regular expression by simply putting forward slashes, and then I would simply use the flag as G. Now G means to go through the entire string even if you find the first occurrence of this substring. So if I save my program now and run it, you can see that now the string is hello universe, this is linuxhint. So that is how you can use the replace method to replace all of the substrings from a particular string. Now let's talk about how can we basically create a substring from a given string. For this we have three different methods that we can use, but I'm going to show them all of those methods together. So I'm just going to simply create this console.log, and in here I'm going to type string1 dot followed up by the method split. Now this split method takes in an attribute which can be the space or the gap. Upon encountering every blank space, it is going to split this string into elements of array. What do I mean by this? Well, it is better to see the output rather than explaining it. So if I simply run my program, you can clearly see that we have an array in the output, and each element of the array is a substring. And this substring is made upon encountering a blank space. So after the hello we had this blank space, so it has converted that into a separate element. After that we had the word world, and after the world we had a space, so that is why it was converted into a separate element. Then again we had the word this followed up by a space, so separate element. So you basically get the idea that upon encountering every space, this split method has converted the words or substrings into separate elements of the returned array. Now we can choose anything. We can simply type in the character D. So what this is going to do is that it is going to take that character, and upon encountering that character it is going to split the substrings. So we have the first element as hello world without the D, and then we have a space followed up by the second element, which is this is linuxhint. So this is how you can use the split method to split or to get the substrings from a particular string. After that we have the substring method. So the substring method actually takes in two numeric arguments. The first is the starting index, which can be 2, and the last or the second argument can be the ending index, which we can simply print out as 8. So now if I run the program, we get the output as LLO space WO, which is now a substring that we got from this. So if I were to simply change this ending index to nothing and only give the starting index, then that would mean start from the index 2 and go up to the very end. And what we can even do is that we can even start with a higher index value like 8, and after that we can provide, let's just start with actually 15, and then let's go to a lower index value as the end value to 2. So if I do this, this would start from 2, which is the lower index value, and go up to the higher index value, which is 15, which ends at the character H. After that we have another method which is known as the slice method. Now the slice method again takes in two numeric inputs, which are the starting value and the length. Unlike the substring method, yes, I have said length, because unlike the substring method which takes in the starting index and the ending index of the substring that you want to fetch. Now this slice method again takes in two arguments. The first one is the starting index and the last one is the ending index. So if I simply run my program, you can see that we get the substring onto the terminal. After that we have another substring method, but this time it is known as the substr. Now on VS Studio Code, you might get this line through the substring method. Now this is because this method is soon to be deprecated. So this method takes in two numeric values as well. The first value is the starting value, and the second argument is actually the length of the returned string. So if I want my substring to start from the index value 2 and I want the length of the substring to be 2 characters long, then I can simply pass that as 2 and 2, and then if I execute my program, you can see that we get the output as double L. So I can simply change the length of the returned substring to be 10 and it would return us 10 characters, starting from the index value that has been passed in the first argument. Other than these, if I simply were to create another string and name it string 2, I have another method that helps us concatenate two strings. So the method is concatenate, and in the brackets you need to pass in the string that you want to concatenate. So string 1 dot concatenate string 2 would actually give us hello world, this is linuxhint, hello world, this is linuxhint. After these, we have a lot more methods like the trim method, trim start, trim end, and the padding methods. But we can go around without working with them. So if you want to learn more about them, you can simply try them out and inspect the output that you get from those methods. Anyways, that was all about some of the methods that come predefined in JavaScript for string manipulations. In this video, we are going to talk about numbers in JavaScript, or we are basically going to cover everything there is to cover about numbers. This includes creating numbers, the types of numbers that you can create using the number object, and even the methods that we get to manipulate numbers. So let's talk about with what numbers are and how do you create a number in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, a number can be any numeric value. So we can have a number like 20. We can even have a numeric value which includes a floating point like 20.22. And after that, we can even create a string containing only numeric characters. So when this string is computed with another operator, any operator other than the addition operator, this would be considered as a numeric value rather than a string. After that, we have some predefined names which have a predefined value. So first of all, we have the infinity. With infinity, we even get the negative infinity. So these are predefined values. So if I were to simply type negative infinity console.log my variable, I would get on my screen that it is a negative infinity. Other than that, we know that we have multiple arithmetic operators that we can use to apply operations on the numbers. For example, we can simply do console.log and then we can type in what is 5 plus 5. This is going to give us 10. Then let's try putting a string. So what's 5 in a string plus 5? That is going to give us 55, because the plus operator basically considers this one as a string and concatenates the two string. But if we had any other operator than the positive one, this is going to perform numerical operation. So we can have multiplication, we can have division, and we can even have the modulus to give us the remainder 0. After moving on from this operator, let's talk about how to create a numeric value in JavaScript with the help of the number object. And we're going to use the predefined numeric values. So if I were to simply create a variable, set it equal to numbers. Now this number is actually an object in JavaScript. After that, I'm going to use the dot operator and then use the max value attribute. So after that, I will simply do console.log and pass in my number variable and get the output. So this is the maximum numeric value that you can store inside JavaScript. Now this is quite large. After the max value, we can even use the min value attribute. So this is going to simply print us the minimum value that you can store inside JavaScript variable. And again, if you want to get positive, and again you have two predefined values that give us negative infinity and positive infinity, and they are known as positive infinity. So we get the output as infinity, and then we have negative infinity. Just like this. So on the terminal we get negative infinity. Now, so that was how to create numbers with the help of the number object using the predefined attributes. But what if we want to create a number with the number object? So we can simply do that with the help of the new keyword followed up by the number constructor, and in here we can pass in the value that we want to give to the a variable. So if I want to give the value 55, I can pass it as a string and then I can get the value as 55. Now this a is not a variable anymore, this is an object, and the type is number and the value is 55. We can confirm it with the help of the type of operator and then setting it equal to the a variable. So we get the type of the a variable as an object. Now there are multiple values that we can pass inside this number constructor. We can even pass like true. So what if we do true and then we do console.log and then in here we simply print out our a variable, that is going to give us that the value that is stored inside this object is now 1. Now why is that so? Remember when we were talking about the boolean data type, we said that the boolean data type can only store one out of two values. It's either true or false. And the value or the numeric value equivalent to true was 1 and the numeric value equivalent to false was 0. So if I simply change this to false, I would get on my terminal the value as 0, meaning that the expression is false. After that, while staying inside the string, we can pass in floating point values just like this and we will get the value as numbers. Other than this, we can directly pass on numeric values like this and we will get that value stored inside the number object that we have just created. After that, if in the number constructor we simply passed in an actual string like the name of a person like John and we executed this program, we would get the value as NAN, meaning that it is not a number. So we can conclude that if we pass in a string containing only numeric values, then we would get that numeric value stored inside in the form of numbers. But if we pass in an actual string consisting of other characters than the numbers, then we will get an NAN error or the NAN data type. Now let's talk about another function that we have in JavaScript, which is the parseInt function. So we are going to create a variable calling it x and we're going to set it equal to the parseInt function, and in the arguments we're going to pass in different things. First of all, let's start by passing in a string. So if I simply pass in the string of numbers and then if I simply console.log the value inside the x variable, then you can see that we get the value as 872 in numbers rather than in strings, and the same is true for floating point variables. And if this string consisted of floating point numbers, then the parseInt is only going to return the integer value, which means that it is going to deprecate the point after the decimal point or the values after the decimal point, and it is only going to return us a whole number. Now what if we created an object, so variable a is equals to new number, and in here we passed in a whole number like 872 again. After that, in this parseInt argument, we are going to pass in the object a. So if we do this, let me also console.log the value of the a variable. Let me clear up my terminal and let me execute my program, and you can clearly see for the variable a we have an object, but for the variable x we only have the numerical value. So this means that if we use the parseInt function, then that it is going to convert the variable from object to an actual number data type. So this is how we can use the parseInt function. Now there are some things that we must know while using the parseInt function. So it can consist of strings as well, but if we simply pass in a number followed up by something non-numeric like 10 years. Now if I execute this program, I would get only the numeric part of this string. And if this string consisted of multiple numeric values separated by a space like 10 space 20 space 30, then it is only going to print out or return the first numeric value that it encounters. And if this function is provided with a string that starts with a non-numeric value and then contains a numeric value, in this particular case it is going to return a NAN data type. So we can conclude that in the parseInt function, if a string is passed which contains non-numeric characters first and then a numeric value, then in that case we would not be returned any number. Other than this, if we had a number stored inside a variable, so we can simply say x is equals to 12.33, we can easily convert this into a string. So we can just go like console.log x.toString. Now what this method is going to do is that it is going to convert this numeric value into a string data type value. So if I print out the output, you can see in the terminal that we have a string. Now how do we know this is a string? Well, it's pretty easy. Let me just console.log the actual value of x. Let me bring up my terminal. Let me clear up my terminal as well and let me rerun the code. So the first value is the actual value of string without the toString method, and as you can see that it has been colored out to yellow, meaning that this is a numeric value, and the other value is simply white. This means that it is a string. Apart from matching the colors, we could have easily used the type of operator. So let me just put that over here. So type of followed up by the variable x and then type of followed up by the expression x.toString. So now if I run my program, you can see that for the first output we have a number and for the second output we have a string data type. So that is how you can use the toString method to convert this into a string data type. After that, When converting a number to a string, we can provide the base on which it has to convert. So for example, a hexadecimal has a base of 16. So if I were to simply pass a value as 15, which in a hexadecimal should be other than 15, and let me set the base of conversion to 16. So if I run this program now, actually I need to remove the type of operator. So we have the actual value followed up by the converted value. So now if I execute this program, you can see that in numbers we have the value as 15, but in hexadecimal string we have the value as f. So this is how you can pass in bases to convert while converting the number to a string data type. After that, instead of toString, you can even use the toExponential function. So if I run this program, you can see that 15 has been converted to an exponential string. After that, we have another method which is toFixed. Now this toFixed method is going to take a number in its argument, and then it is going to return representing a number in fixed point notation. So let me just change my number to 155.5555, and then I'm going to pass in the argument as 2. So now if I run my program, I get the value as 155.56. So you can clearly see that the value after the decimal point has been rounded off to 2 digits. Now after the toFix method, we have the toPrecision function. Now if we hover over it, we can clearly see that it returns a string containing a number represented either in exponential or fixed point notation with a specific number of digits. So if we were to simply provide the argument as 2 and run our program, we would get the output in the form of exponents, but with a specified number of digits. Other than these, we have another method that is used to get the value of a particular object, number object. So it's x.valueOf. So if I were to do this and get the output, I would get the exact value. But this would make more sense if we had a number object. So I'm going to create a number object, set it equal to a, set that equal to new number constructor, and in here I'm going to pass in the value as 1555.55. And after that, I'm going to change the console.log from x.to a.valueOf. Then if we get the output, we only get the value part of this object instead of the whole object. So these were almost all of the methods through which you can create a number in JavaScript and manipulate them using the pre-built methods. So in this video, we're going to talk about arrays. So let's start with how to create array. So basically we already know this way of creating arrays. You basically create a variable and then set it equal to square brackets, and within the square brackets you basically type in the elements of the array. But there are other methods to create arrays other than this. The first method is by using an object constructor method. For that, you simply create a variable. So we can say that we're going to create a variable named as cars1 and then set it equal to new array, which is a constructor, and in this constructor you're going to pass in the values of the elements of the array. So we can again have the same values. After that, if we want to access a value or a particular value from the array, then we can use the square bracket notation. So basically, what if I want to store this Volvo inside a separate variable? For that, I'm going to create a variable. I'm just going to call this one as car number 1, and then I'm going to set it equal to the name of the array, which is cars, and then square brackets, and then the index value of this Volvo, which is going to be 1. Using this, I can access the values. Now to confirm that I have successfully accessed this value, we can simply use the console.log function and pass in the variable car1. So now if I run my program, I get the output as Volvo. But what if you're working with an array that is created dynamically and you want to iterate through that array? For that, you need to know the entire length of the array. Now, you can easily find the length of an array by using the name of the array and then the property, which is length. For example, let's say I create a variable named as length of array, and then I set it equal to the array cars dot the property, which is length. So now if I simply go console.log, and in this function I'm going to pass in my length of array variable. So now if I run my program, I get that the length is 3. Basically it means that it has 3 items inside that array. Also, with the help of this length property, we can easily access the last element of the array. So we can say variable last item is equals to cars, and then in this I'm just going to type in the name of the array, which is cars.length. This basically means the last index, and after the cars.length we simply need to subtract 1 from it, as indexes start from 0 and not from 1. Using this, we can easily access the last element of the array. So now if I were to simply type in the console.log function, and in this function I'm going to pass in my last item variable and run my program, I get the last item, which is BMW. So that is how you can get the last element. After that, now let's try the type of operator on an array. So if I simply go console.log, and in this I'm going to use the type of operator followed up by the name of my array, which is cars, and then when I run my program I get the output as object. So basically we can clearly see that an array in JavaScript is considered to be an object. But what if we want to confirm whether this object is actually an array or not? Well, for that we have another function which is array with a capital A dot isArray. Now this is a method of the array class. After that we are going to pass in the name of our array, which is cars, and then just simply wrap this whole statement inside console.log method. After that, now if I run my program, I get the output as true, meaning that this object cars is actually an array. Now oftentimes when you're working with arrays, what you need to do is that you need to convert the elements of that array or the whole array itself into a string. Now we can easily do that by using the toString method. So to convert an array to a string, you simply type in the name of the array followed up by the toString method. And you do not need to pass anything inside the parameters of this method. Just simply wrap this whole statement around the console.log method to get the output onto the terminal. Now save our program and run it, and this time around we can see that we have the array as a string. Now if you want to compare this with the output of the array, then simply type console.log and in here simply pass in the name of our array and then hit enter. And then run the code. So you can see that at first we have the array elements in the form of a string, and the other output is actually the array itself. Now what we can also do is that we can confirm that it is a string by using the type of operator right over here. So now if I save my code and execute it, I get the output that it is now a string. Anyways, let's talk about how to use the join method on arrays. Now the join method actually converts the array into a single string by removing the comma. So to use this join method, simply type the name of the array followed up by join, and then in the arguments of the join method you need to type in a character or a string that would be used to join multiple elements. So if I were to simply type in asterisk symbol right over here and then wrap this whole statement inside a console.log method and then save my code and execute it, you can see in the output that we have the element then separated by the character that we have passed in within this argument, and then the other element and then the third element. So that is how you can get a string or a customized string out of an array. Now let's talk about how to insert data at the end of the array and how to get the element at the end of an array. Basically, this whole process is known as pushing and popping. Pushing is the process in which you insert the data at the end of a stack. Now popping is the process in which you get the last element from the stack. So simply type the name of the array, then a dot operator, and then you simply type the name of the process, which is push. And then what you can do is you need to put round brackets, and then within these round brackets or within the arguments of this push method you need to type in the element that you want to push at the end of the array. So let's say I want to push Audi. Now to confirm this, that this element has been inserted at the end of array, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to type console.log before the push method, and I'm going to duplicate it right after the push method as well. So let me just clear up my terminal and run the code. So as you can see that at first we had 3 elements inside the array, and after my push method I had the 4 elements, and also the last element or the OD was added as the last element of this array. Now let's talk about how to extract the last element. So when you pop something from the array, it is removed from the array itself. For example, if I simply type cars.pop and store it inside a variable, let last item is equals to car.pop. So if I do that and console.log my last item variable, and also I want to console.log my array after the popping process. So now if I run my code, you can see that at first we had 3 elements. After that we added an element, so we got 4 elements. Then we use the cars.pop method and store that variable or store that value inside this last item variable, and the output of the last item variable was Audi. And after using the pop method, we had only 3 items inside that array because the last item was popped out of this array. Anyways, that was the process of pushing and popping elements to and from arrays. But what if you do not want to add an element or remove the element from the last index? What if you want to do that in the first index? Well, for that we have the method as unshift to add the element at the start of an array. And if we want to remove the element from the start, then we have the method as shift. Anyways, if I were to save my program and execute it, you can see that at first I had my normal array, but after the unshift method, the element OD was added at the first index. And after that, When we use the shift method to get the element, it was removed from the first index of the array. So basically, shift and unshift are the exact opposite of pop and push methods. What if you do not want to fetch an element from the array, you just want to delete a particular index? So what I'm going to do right now is, I'm going to first print out my array with the help of console.log method. After that, I'm going to use the keyword delete and then the index of the element that I want to delete from the array. So it can be cars, and then I want to delete Volvo, so it's going to be cars bracket 1. After that, I'm going to again print out my array using the console.log method. So now if I run my code, you can clearly see that at first we had Saab, Volvo and BMW, but after the delete keyword, this element was removed. However, as you can clearly see that it is still consuming some space. However, if we were to fetch this element using the console.log method, so it's going to be console.log, then cars and then index value 1, then in the output we can see that it is returned as undefined because it has been deleted from the array. After that, to create sub-arrays, you can use the method as slice and splice just like we did in the string manipulations video. After that, we can use the index of method to find the index of a particular element inside an array as well. So I'm just going to type in console.log and then the name of the array, which can be cars, then the index of method, and then the element which we want to find. So I want to find BMW. Simply save our code and run it, and we will get the output of the index value, which is 2. So the element BMW is placed at the index value 2. Now what if we want to concatenate the elements of 2 or more arrays? Then we can easily use the concat method as well. So create a variable for the concatenated array. So we're going to call this one as array3, and then the first array followed up by the dot operator, followed up by the concat method, and within the arguments of the concat method, we're going to pass in the second array, which in our case is actually cars2. Just do that, and after that simply use the console.log method to print out the array3 variable onto the terminal, just like that. So you can see that the elements of both the arrays have been concatenated inside this array3 variable. Now what if you wanted to concatenate 3 arrays? Well, let's create another variable for our array4 and let's just set it equal to array3.concat, and within this I want to concatenate my cars array and also my cars2 array. So now if I were to simply type console.log, and within this method I'm going to pass in my array4 variable and get the output on the terminal, so we can clearly see that we have a lot of elements because we have concatenated 3 arrays. So that is how you can use the concat method to concatenate 2 or more arrays in JavaScript. Now after that, let's talk about creating filters to filter out your array upon a specific condition. So you can see in my editor that I have created an array of numbers. So what if I wanted to filter out the first number that is greater than 50? For that, I'm going to first create a variable. I'm just going to call this one as first and set it equal to numbers dot the find method. Now this find method actually takes in a function, and that function is used to apply filtering. So I'm just going to pass the function name as myfunc and then put a semicolon at the end. Now I need to create that function as well. So I'm going to create that function with the name of function keyword. The name is myfunc. After that, this function with the help of the find method can get 3 values. The first is the value itself, the second is the indexes of those values, and the third is arrays. So by default, the template looks something like this. But this time around we are only concerned with the value. So for that I'm going to remove index and array. Anyways, now within this function I only want to return the value that is greater than 50. Now the thing is that this function will not go through the entire list if it finds the value that is greater than 50. Now this is because of the return statement. When the return statement is reached, the function execution is stopped. So now if I came out of this function and use the console.log method to print out the value stored inside my first variable and then execute the program, you can see that we have the value stored as 123. But what if I wanted to filter out all the numbers that are greater than 50? Now for that we have the filter method instead of this find method. So if I were to simply replace this method with the filter and then run my code, you can see that I get all of the values that were greater than 50. So again, the find method is used to filter out only one element from the array, whereas the filter method can be used to filter out all the elements depending upon a specific condition. Now after the filter method, we have the for each method. Now this for each method is used to take the elements of the array one by one and pass them to the function defined or passed inside the arguments of the for each. So coming to this function, instead of return, I can simply just go like console.log and print out the value that is coming inside this myfunc function. After that, I actually do not need to store the return value of the for each method. So now if I save my code and execute it, you can see that this command, which was the console.log command, was executed for every item within our array. So that is how you can use the for each function. Now if we come back to this filter part, and what if I do not want to filter elements, rather I want to check a specific condition for every element inside an array. For example, if I want to make sure that every item in my numbers array is greater than 40, for that what I can do is I can simply use the method which is every. After that, what this method is going to do is that it is going to take every item and it is going to then check that item against this condition. And then if any items fails this condition, it will return false as the result. And if every item in the list passes this test, then it will return true. So let me just check this one out and run my code. You can see that we got the output as false, and the reason for that is we have the number 4, the number 22 and the number 1, which is less than our condition. So let me just increase that values. So let me just make it 400, 220 and also 100. Save my code and execute the program once again. We get the value as true because every item satisfies this condition. So that is how you can use the every method in the JavaScript. Now in contrast to the every method, what if I want to check that if any element inside my array matches a specific condition? Now for that I have the method as sum. So this is going to check every item, and if any of that item matches my condition, it is going to return as true. And if none of the items match my condition, only then it is going to return as false. So if I run my code now, it is going to return true because the values 123, 66 and 52 matches the condition. And if I reduce them and rerun the code, I get the output as false, meaning that no items in the list match the following condition. Now what if I want to apply a specific mapping on every element of my array? For example, what if I want to multiply every element by 2? Now for that we have a very simple method, which is the map method, and after that in the return statement I can simply perform the action that I want to do for every element. For example, I want to multiply the elements by 2, just like that. So now if I run my code, I get the output as the exact double of my previous elements. So that is how you can use the map method to perform or map certain qualities or functionalities with every item in that array. Now after that, let's talk about sorting arrays and reversing arrays. So for that I'm going to actually take two arrays. One is going to be of numbers and the other one is going to be of strings. So now by default in JavaScript we have these two methods named as .sort method and the .reverse method. So let's try applying the sort method and the reverse method on both of these arrays. So let's use console.log and then apply numbers.sort. And after that, we're just going to go with strings.sort. So now if I run my code, for the strings array, you can see that it has been sorted in the ascending order and in the descending order perfectly fine. But when it comes to numbers, the sorting is not done correctly. Now the reason for this is that it is taking these numbers as strings or characters and then it is sorting them and reversing them according to their string precedence. So that is why we do not get sorted arrays when it comes to numbers and reverse sorted arrays when it comes to numbers as well. Now properly sort an array of numbers, what we are going to do is that we are going to type the name of the array. After that we are going to type the sort method, and inside this sort method we are going to create a custom function. So simply type the keyword function, then the arguments or the parameters which are going to be a and b, which are going to be the numbers that are given to this function one by one. Now inside this function, if we want to sort this array in the ascending order, then we simply have to return a minus b, and just like that our sorting for numbers is done. After that we can simply go like console.log and then print out our numbers array onto this terminal. So now if I run my code, I get the numbers array sorted in ascending order. But what if I want to sort this array in the descending order? For that I would simply have to change this return statement from a minus b to b minus a, and my descending order sorting would be done. So now if I run my code, we can clearly see that the array has been sorted in the descending order. So that is how you can sort the numbers array in JavaScript. And that also brings us to the end of this video of array manipulations in JavaScript. Now the key thing over here is that you need to practice a lot before getting good at array manipulations and string manipulations in JavaScript. If I were to tell you that the data is transferred in a different form between the server and the client than the programming itself, you would be amazed. Well, there is nothing to be amazed. Actually, it is done with the help of JSON. Now, what is JSON and how is it used? That we are going to learn in this section. So in this video, we are going to talk about JSON. So we're basically going to talk about what is JSON and why is it used. So starting off with the abbreviation, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And JSON is used to format data while it is being transported from the server or to the server to the client-side application. Now even though the abbreviation for JSON stands as JavaScript Object Notation, still it is not restricted to the JavaScript language only. JSON is actually language independent, which means that almost all of the modern day languages or the programming languages actually support the use of JSON. So that is why whenever the client-side server is trying to store JSON in a file, it is always stored with a file with the extension of JSON, not JavaScript. Anyways, let's talk about the creation of a JSON object in JavaScript. Now first of all, let's assume that you want to transfer data about a person. Basically the data that you want to transfer is his first name and the last name. So how would you do that in the form of JSON? Well, it's really simple. You start off with curly brackets and then you use the key value pairs for first name and last name, just like we do in objects. But the key difference between an object of JavaScript and the JSON is that the key part is also enclosed between quotation marks. So we have the first name, then colon, followed up by the value for this first name, which can be John, then a comma, and after that we have the other key for last name, then colon, and then the value for the last name, which can be Doe. Now if you look closely, we have this squiggly line right beneath the column showing us that this is an error. Well, actually this is an error in JavaScript but not in JSON. Now what do I mean by this? Again, like I've said, that the JSON is stored inside a file with the extension of JSON. So I'm going to create a file named as person.json, and then in this file I can store my JSON just like this and we do not get any error. After that, what if you don't have actually one person whose information that you want to share over the internet or over the network, but actually multiple persons that you want to share? So for that, what we're going to do now is that we're going to create multiple instances of the first name and the last name, just like that, and we're going to provide different values. But this still does not look very pretty because we want to enclose all of this data or all of this information about the first name and the last name of three different persons inside another object which tells that okay, this is the data about multiple persons of a company. So what we can do is that we can basically wrap all of these values inside an array using square brackets, just like that. And when we do that, we need to separate each JSON object with a comma. After that, this looks like the value part of a key value pair. So we are missing the key part. Now for the key part, I'm going to put a colon and then I'm going to define a key named as person. So we have a key part and the value part, but we're still missing one thing. We're missing the curly brackets that actually encloses the key value pair. So let me just place out curly brackets right over here, just like this. And now we have a JSON of all the person or the person's information, which actually contains the information about three different persons, which are the first name and the last name of those three persons. So that is how you can create a JSON. But coming back to JSON in JavaScript, so we are going to shift over to the .js file, and this time around let's try to create the same information but in the form of an object. So let's create an object. So it's going to be person equal to curly brackets, and it is going to have a first name like John, then comma, then it is going to have a last name colon Doe, and actually this is a colon, not an equal symbol. After that, it is going to have an age of let's say 22, and also it is going to have an occupation. Now what if I want to convert this person object into a JSON while staying inside the JavaScript? I do not want to do it manually and head inside a JSON file and then type out the details in the JSON format. Well, we can easily do that with the help of the JSON class and the stringify method. So if I were to simply use json.stringify and pass in my person object in here, and to get the result onto the terminal, I would simply wrap this whole statement around in a console.log method, just like that. And now if I run my code, you can clearly see that in the output we have the JSON string, not an object but a JSON string. Even though you may think that it looks like an object onto the terminal, but if you see the key parts, they are enclosed within quotation marks, meaning that this is a JSON string. So that is how you can use the JSON.stringify method to convert any object created in JavaScript into a JSON formatted string so that it can be transferred over the network. Anyways, this was the basic introduction of JSON in JavaScript, JSON in general, and why JSON is used. Most of the times, programmers are concerned with date values as they are very complicated to store, yet very essential when it comes to live and large scale applications. In this section, we're going to talk about the date object that we get as default in JavaScript, and it is a very crucial topic, so make sure to learn it very clearly. In this video, we're going to talk about the date object in JavaScript. Well, when you're working on JavaScript applications, especially on large-scale applications, you must work around with users, and with users come the difficulty of maintaining dates. So, to maintain dates, it is a good way to use strings. However, doing so many string manipulations in a single application can be a big trouble. So, JavaScript came up with a solution that is the date object. So basically, you can create a date object which is a greatly formatted object that can help reduce the time of the programmer to deal with dates. Also, it contains multiple methods that help us to manipulate the dates. Now let's talk about how to create the date object. So to create a date object, you simply create a new variable. Let me just call this one as date and then set it equal to new date constructor. Now if we use the new date constructor without passing any arguments, then it is going to set the current date as the default date inside our date variable. So if I simply do console.log and pass in my date variable inside over here and run the code, you can see that the date has been assigned as the year 2022, the month 11 which is November, and the day which is 26th of November, which is totally accurate. Now what if we want to store the date on which the user signs up? So for that we can use this new date constructor. But after that, what if we want to store the date of birth of the user? Now that cannot be stored with the help of the current date. For that we need to store it with a specific date. Now we can also do that. So let's create a new variable. Let's just call it date1 and then set it equal to the new date constructor. But this time around we are not going to leave the constructor blank. We are actually going to pass in a date string. So what is a date string? Basically a date string is a normal string value which represents a date. So if I want to create a date variable with the date being 2002 February 20th, so I would simply type in 2002 February, and then for the 20th date I would have to type the day as 21 because the day counter starts from 0. So if I do that, and then if I go console.log and then print out my date1 variable and run my code, you can see that the date that has been stored is 2002 February and the day is 20th. Now there are a few other things that you can perform while creating this date. So for example, we know that the February has 28 days, but what if we created the date variable with the help of February 29, which would actually mean February 28th, so we would get the February 28 onto the terminal. But if we were to simply change this day to 30th of February, which will mean it is going to try to store February 29, which does not exist. So for that case, it is going to change the month to March. So that is why we get the month value as 3. But if we type in something ridiculous like 45 and run a code, we will get the error as invalid date. Other than that, let's just work around with the current date. So we have the date variable which gives us 2022 November 26th. Now what if we have this date value stored inside our database and we only want to fetch the month of the joining of a particular user? Now we can easily do that. So let me just create a variable, let's just call it month, and set it equal to the date variable dot, and then we have the method get month. After that, simply place in round brackets, then a semicolon, and then console.log this month variable onto the terminal. Clear up our terminal and then rerun the code, and we get the month as 10. Now why do we get this month as 10 when the value is stored as November? Well, again, the values for month and the values for day start with 0. So this basically means this is November. Now if you still want the accurate date, you can come over here and simply type in +1. That would give you 11 onto the terminal. Similarly, you have another method get full year, which is going to return you the year in which the user joined or the year stored inside the date variable. So now if I simply change this variable name to year and year over here as well, and then run my code, I get the year as 2022. After that, if I want to get the day of the month, then I have the method getDay, and if I run this code, I will get the output as 26th, just like that. So that is how you can use the date variable or the date object in JavaScript to store dates inside your application. Anyways, that is how you can use the date object in JavaScript. Any program in the world is prone to errors, and a good programmer is that which can deal with any error that presents itself. And for that purpose, we need to be aware of error handling and the techniques that are used in error handling. In this section, we are going to talk about error handling in the JavaScript programming language. So let's start with error handling. In this video, we are going to talk about the error handling in JavaScript. But before going over to error handling, we must know what are the types of errors and why do they occur. Starting off, we have the most basic type of error, which is known as the syntax error. Well, the syntax error is very simple. You basically misspell something or you do not follow the syntax rule of a programming language, then you run into syntax error. For example, we have this function console.log that is used to print anything onto the terminal. But what if instead of writing console.log, we misspell something like for log we double spell the L. After that, if I save my code and try to execute it, I will get this error onto the terminal, just like that. The syntactical errors are really easy to identify as they show an error onto the console or onto the terminal. Now after the syntactical errors, we have an error type which is very difficult to detect and very difficult to actually handle, which are the logical errors. Well, these logical errors are very hard to detect because they are not actually errors, they are actually the wrong solution expecting the right results. For example, what if I want to create a function to add two values? So I'm just going to create a function like add num, and then I'm going to place in a and b as my variables, and then I'm going to return a negative b. So you see right over there, I did not make a syntactical error. Instead of the plus symbol, I've actually added the negative symbol. So when I try to get the sum of two numbers using this function, for example, I simply go like console.log, then I use the add num function, and in this I simply type in 5 and 3, and I'm expecting the result to be 8, but when I run this program, I get the result as 2. Now the thing with this logical error is that it did not show us any error on the terminal, on the console, or on the browser window. This is because this is not actually an error, it's a wrong use of logic. So these errors can be very hard to detect, and the reason for these errors are actually the programmer who uses the wrong logic. Anyways, after the logical errors, we have other errors which can be handled with the try-catch statements. So basically, there are some statements in which we expect errors to come. For example, opening up a file that is placed inside another server or another PC. So different types of errors can occur. An error can be expected because the other server machine can be powered off, or it may not even respond due to the large load of traffic. So we need to handle those types of errors. Now to handle those types of errors which are neither syntactical errors or logical errors, in JavaScript we have the try, catch, finally and throw statement. So let's talk about these statements one by one. So first of all, we have the try keyword and then followed up by curly brackets. Now this try block is used to specify the action that we want JavaScript to perform. For example, I want to print out console.log and I want to print hello world onto the terminal, just like that. But what if there are no syntactical errors and no logical errors, but JavaScript happens to run inside some other type of error? Now upon encountering that error, we do not want our application to fully crash. We want our application to be dynamic enough to handle whatever error that has occurred. For that, we are going to simply type in the catch block. Now the catch blocks is very simple. It basically means that try this thing that is inside the try block, and if this thing fails, then whatever the error may be, do the action that are written right over here. And a good practice is that when you're writing the catch block, you simply type in round brackets and then pass in the error that has occurred inside this catch block. After that, let's say I want to print out the error that has occurred onto the terminal, then I can simply type console.log and my error onto the terminal, just like that. So now if I run my code, I will not get any error because I'm just using console.log, which does not actually return any error. So let's try an example of the try catch statement. So we're going to do the console.log but with a misspelled log, and then we're going to print out hello world. Now this is going to return us an error. Now we want the program to not crash but actually handle this error. So we're going to come inside the catch block, and for the console.log in this statement we're going to simply say the error is colon and then a plus symbol to concatenate the error and our string. And then now if we run our program, we can see that the program did not actually crash. Or we can simply print out that the remaining program is running outside of this try catch block statement to mimic an application. So now if I run my program, so we can see that we did not encounter an error in the try catch block statement which caused our application to stop execution. So that is why we were able to execute this line that was outside of the try catch statement as well. And we even got the error onto the terminal as well. So it says that the error is actually a type error, and the error is that console.log is not a function. So that is how you can use the try catch statements to try something out and catch those errors. Now after the try and catch block, we have the finally block. Now the finally block is to execute something regardless of the result of the try catch statement. For example, I want to print out console.log welcome to linuxhint, and I want this line to be executed no matter the result of the try catch block statement. So now if I clear up my terminal and rerun the code, you can see that we got the output that there was an error in the console.log function. But regardless of this error, we got the output welcome to linuxhint. But what if we fix this error, save our code and rerun the code? We would get the line that was inside the try statement, hello world, and after that we got the line inside the finally block which was welcome to linuxhint, and then the remaining part of our application was still being executed. So that is how you can use the try, catch and finally statements in JavaScript. Now within these try, catch and finally statements, we have another keyword that is used to throw custom errors to the user or to the application's output. For that we have to use the keyword throw, just like this. So we can use throw and then a custom error notification in the form of a string. Now to demonstrate the use of the throw statement, we would have to change our program a little. So suppose that we are working with percentages and someone has inserted the percentage greater than 100. So we have the percentage variable which now has 105, which is not true. So in the try statements, we're going to check whether the percentage is greater than 100 or less than 100 or not. And if this percentage is actually greater than 100, then we want to throw a custom error that percentage cannot be more than 100. After that, let's remove the finally clause and let's rerun the code. So as you can see in the output, we have the output as the error is, which was the part inside the catch block, and then the error that we have created, and then the error notification or the error string that we have created inside this throw block. So with the help of these throw statements, you can actually try and handle the logical errors. Anyways, that is how you can use the try, catch, finally and the throw keywords to error handle in JavaScript. Now with the last section, we are basically done with JavaScript. But we need to know the importance of JavaScript when it comes to web development, because JavaScript is a scripting language which is most beneficial when it is used with HTML and CSS and for the manipulation of DOM, which is the document object model of the web page that you are viewing. So how do we do that? Well, that is exactly what we are going to learn in this section, which is DOM manipulation. So in this video, we are going to talk about the DOM manipulation that we can perform with the help of JavaScript. So JavaScript is a scripting language that is mostly used with web development, basically to manipulate the HTML elements or the DOM. Now, we are going to learn how to do that since we have already learned everything that is to learn about JavaScript. We have covered functions, we have covered variables, objects, arrays, and even exporting and importing, and even the concept of modularity in JavaScript. So now I'm going to set up my environment. So first off, create an index.html page or file. Now in this file, simply hit Shift and 1 and then hit Tab to create this boilerplate. Now within this boilerplate, I'm going to give it a different title. So I'm just going to call this one as DOM manipulations. After that, within this explorer, I'm going to create another file which is going to be named as script.js. So this file would contain all of the commands that are going to be used to manipulate the DOM. So what I want to do now is I want to link this script.js with my index.html page. So for that, simply come over to index.html and then simply create a new script tag, and in this tag you're going to type in the src attribute and set it equal to the path of my script.js file, just like this. Now my script.js is linked with my HTML. After that, to showcase manipulations, we are going to start with accessing elements and changing their values. Now, simply head inside the body of your web page, then type in the center tag. After that, we are going to create a new paragraph tag that says DOM manipulations in JavaScript. After that, like I said, we are going to perform accessing attributes or accessing the DOM elements and changing their values with the help of JavaScript. Now to access an HTML element with the help of JavaScript, you need to first make a reference to that particular element. Now that reference can be made with the help of a tag name, by its own name, by class name, or by its ID. So to showcase, we are going to do it first with its ID. So we're going to create a new paragraph tag and we're going to give it a specific ID like change my text. And as you can see that I'm not going to place anything in between this paragraph tag. And just to make it much more visible, I'm going to style this center tag with a background color of dark sea green, just like that. After that, simply click on this go live button, which is actually from the extension live server that we have installed in the environment setup video. So click on it and you would get the output on the browser. So we have DOM manipulation in JavaScript, but that is only one p tag and the other p tag is not being displayed as it is completely empty. So now we are going to take JavaScript to access this p tag with the ID change my text and insert some text inside it. Now for that, simply head over to script.js. And in here, we want to create the reference and store it inside a variable, a JavaScript variable. So let's just create a variable and let's call it p tag and let's set it equal to document, which is the DOM's object, and then we're going to use this method that is to get the element with the help of its ID. And after that, in the arguments of this method, we're going to paste in the exact same ID of the element that we want to fetch. So that is going to be change my text. Now we have the reference stored inside this variable. After that, we can use this variable p tag, then the dot operator, to change its value. Now to change the value, we're going to use a property which is known as the inner HTML, and we're going to set it equal to this is added with JavaScript. But before saving it, I'm going to bring up my browser side by side to my VS Studio Code, just like that. So as soon as I save my program, so as you can see that nothing actually happens onto the web page. Now why is that so? Basically, if we head back over to index.html, so all of this JavaScript and the HTML is executed line by line. So in the head tag, it is going to the script and initializing this script. Now at the time that script is initialized, there is no such thing as the p tag which we are trying to access. Now if we want to make work of this with only this code, then we have to copy the script tag and paste it at the very end of the body tag. And just like that, we have added this line with the help of JavaScript. Now, this may not look like a good approach, but there is other ways to work around that, or there is a better way, that is to use the functions with JavaScript, which we are going to talk about after we have learned how to access elements using their class names and tag names. Anyways, by now we were using ID, but what if I want to access elements under a specific class name? So let me just change this ID to class name or class. Now in the script, I would have to change this method which says get element by ID. So now to access an element with the help of its class name, we have this method that is document.getElement by class name. After that, I need to simply type the same exact class which is change my text, just like that. And as soon as I save my program, but as you can see that nothing actually happens onto the web page. So why is that so? So whenever you are using the getElements by class name, you can clearly see in the name of this method it's elements, meaning that it returns multiple elements which have the same class name. So that can only be done in JavaScript with the help of arrays. So there is only one element under the name change my text or under the class name change my text. So therefore we're going to specify which particular index of that array we want to change in our HTML of. So type in square bracket notation and then type in the first index, which is index 0. Now as I save this program, you can see that we have added this line with the help of JavaScript. Now you might be wondering, why is this method better than, or why is this method even compared to getElements by ID? Well, again, getElement by ID is used to only fetch one unique element from the HTML document, whereas getElements by class name can be used to return multiple elements with the help of their class name. Anyways, now let's talk about events. Since we have already talked about how to refer a variable and how to change its value with the help of JavaScript, now we are going to perform some action based upon a particular event. Now for this we are going to clear up our JavaScript file, and after that we are going to actually create a new button onto the web page. So let's create a button and let's give it an ID which is going to be my button. And after that we are going to use this button to say click me to add text. After that we want to add some kind of functionality to this button, because right now if you click on this button nothing actually happens. Now to add functionality to this button we want to add an event on this button, and to be precise we want to add the onClick event. So simply come over to the tag of the button and type in the onClick property. After that we are going to set this property equal to a function that would be found inside our script file. So the function is going to be myfunc, just like that. Now what we need to do is that we need to come over to our script.js file, and in here we are going to now define that function. So the function is going to be myfunc, and in this function we are going to perform the same steps that we did before. So we are going to create a new variable which is going to be p-tag, and we are going to set it equal to document.getElementById, and the ID is change my text. After that we are going to use this p-tag variable to change the inner HTML to text added with button click, just like that. After that now we do not need to paste the script tag at the end of the body tag, and the reason for that is the script or this part of the script or the function myfunc would be only executed when the whole body is loaded and when the user performs this specific event, which is to click on the button. After changing the ID, I can come over to my document or the output on the browser, and if I click on the button you can see that the text has been added with the help of button click. Now after this, JavaScript can be also used to apply styling on certain elements. For that let's create another center element. This time around we're going to give it an ID to add bg. After that, inside this center tag we're going to create a paragraph tag that says click on the button to add background. After that we want to create the button that would be used for this purpose that says click me, and then we're going to add in the onClick event. Now this onClick event would execute the add background function in our script file. So now what we need to do is that we need to create this function in our script file. So let's create that function add background, and in this function we are first going to create the reference to our center tag. So it's going to be variable add bg is equals to document.getElementById, and the ID was add bg. After that simply type add bg the variable dot style dot background color and set its value equal to any background color that you want to add. So let's add blue. After that save both of the files, head back to the output and click on the button to add the blue background or basically the styling with the help of JavaScript. So that is how you can perform CSS styling or add or manipulate the CSS styling on certain HTML elements with the help of JavaScript. After that, let's talk about some more events that we get with JavaScript and how to manage them without creating an external JavaScript file. So let's head back over to our Visual Studio Code, and this time around I'm going to remove this script tag from here. After that I'm also going to remove everything from the screen. So now in the body tag let's create an h1 tag which has a new event which is the onMouseOver event, and upon onMouseOver it is going to call the mover function from the script. But to execute this mover function we need to pass the reference to the object, so we are going to place the this keyword, and my h1 tag says move the mouse over me. After that, previously we had learned how to include the JavaScript for DOM manipulation or for CSS manipulation in a separate file, but to create the JavaScript within the HTML file we have to use the script tags. Now in between the script tag without the src attribute we can simply type a JavaScript code. So the very first thing that we want to do is that we want to create this mover function. So create function is equals to mover, and it is going to catch an object. And what this function is going to do is that it is going to take that object which is h1 dot change its inner HTML to, let's say it says thank you, just like that. After that we can get back over to our output, and as you can see that we have our h1 tag that says move the mouse over me, and as soon as I bring the mouse cursor over the tag it says thank you. After that we also want this tag to say move mouse over me again when we move the cursor outside of this. So for this we are going to add another event that is onMouseOut, and this time around we are going to set it equal to mout, and then we are going to pass in the reference to our h1 element using the this keyword. Now inside the script we also want to create this function, so function mout, which is going to catch the object h1, and we're going to change the inner HTML back to move the mouse over me, just like that. So if I save my program, head back over to my output, we can see that it says move the mouse over me. When we bring the cursor, it says thank you, and then when we bring the cursor out, it says move the mouse over me once more. After that, we also want to add in the events for mouse click, which is basically mouse down, and mouse up, which is basically releasing the click. For that, let's add them in the same tag. Now to demonstrate this, we are going to create another h1 tag, and in this tag, we are going to simply add the event on mouse down, which is going to go over to mDown function with this reference. Now this h1 tag says click on me. Now in the script, we are going to create this function. So function mDown, which is going to catch an object. Again, we know the process. It's object.innerHTML, and let's set it equal to you have pressed the mouse button. Similarly, we also want to add in the event for mouse up. So the event is on mouse up. For this, we are going to look for the function mup, and then we are going to pass the reference as this. Let's create that function as well. And within this function, we're going to simply say that in HTML, you released the click, just like that. So now let's head back over to our output. So we have the first h1 tag on which when we move over the mouse, it changes the text to thank you, and when we release or get out of this tag, it says move the mouse over me. And the second HTML tag that says click on me, and when we click on it, it says you have pressed the mouse button, and when we release the click, it says you release the click. So that is how you can apply mouse events on HTML elements and handle them with JavaScript. Now what if you have an element on the HTML document, but there is no event listed upon that element, and you want to add that event with the help of JavaScript, and then you also want to manage that event with the help of JavaScript as well. So let's do that. So now you can see that I have created this h1 tag with a particular ID that says add event, and the h1 tag itself says click me. Now in the script, the very first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to get the reference of this h1 tag. So variable h tag is equals to document.getElement by ID, and the ID is add event. After that, I want to add an event. So the method is add event listener. Now this method takes in two arguments. The first is the event that you want to apply. So I want to apply the click event. After that, it takes the function to be executed upon that particular event. So the function would be myfunc. After that, while staying inside the script tag, I want to create that function. So function myfunc is equals to, and then within this function, I want to alert the user that he has pressed the h1 tag. So I'm going to use the window object, which is of the browser, and then use the alert method to simply alert that says you clicked the h1 tag, just like that. So now if I save my program and head on over to the output on the browser, you can clearly see that we have this tag that says click me, and when I click on it, it says that you clicked the h1 tag. So that is how you can also add event listeners on particular elements in the HTML document, and then use JavaScript to actually handle those events as well. Anyways, that was all about the DOM manipulation that you can perform with the help of JavaScript. Now the possibilities of DOM manipulations are almost infinite. So make up your mind to search for new things and keep trying them on one by one. And like I've said in the last video before this section, that we are done with this entire course. So now what we can do is that we can create a mini project which is going to use our concept that we have learned throughout this course. So let's create a mini project. Now with the last video, we have completed the course of JavaScript, and in this video we are going to basically create this mini project which you can see on the screen. So basically this is an HTML form that takes the full name of a person, the ID card number, and then the person's salary and the city from that person belongs from. And once we click on the submit button, it is going to take all of the information from these lines and display them inside this table. Now within this table, we have these two options. The first is to edit this table. So when I click on edit, it is going to bring the details right back in the form, and we can edit the details. So we can change the city like, and when I click on submit, it is going to update the fields accordingly. And also we have this delete button. So if I click on this delete button, it is going to delete the record from my page after showing this confirmation. Anyways, let's start from the scratch. So in the VS Studio Code, simply create a new folder, and in this folder we're going to create three different files. The first file is going to be index.html, the other one is going to be script.javascript, and the third one is going to be style.css. So let's start with index.html. Simply press Shift 1 and then tab to create this boilerplate, and I'm going to change the title to mini project. Once that is done, let's add all of the elements inside the HTML document. So starting off, simply copy paste these lines from the file that is attached with this video. Now this is basically the icons that we are using for the edit and the delete option. After that, let's link our style sheet as well. So simply create a link tag and type it as style.css. And lastly, let's also link our script.js file. So create a script tag with the source attribute and set it equal to script.js. And then let's head inside the body of the HTML document. And in this body, we're going to create the form. Now in the body tag, I'm going to simply paste in the code that is also provided to you in the files available with this video. Because I'm not going to go over the HTML code, I want to talk about the JavaScript part. So I'm not going to go over the styling or the HTML code, but still I'm going to explain to you what this code does. So starting off, we are actually creating a table which will be used to display our form. And then in the first row and in the first cell, we are creating a form. Now the key point here is that we are setting the onSubmit button to event or prevent default. Now what is this? Basically, when you click the onSubmit button of the form, it takes you to a particular link on which basically the backend server should be, or where your data is being stored. So basically we want to handle everything with the help of JavaScript, and for that we actually want to call a custom function which is going to be onFormSubmit, which we are going to create in JavaScript. After that, we're also setting the autocomplete attribute of the form or the input tags of the form as off so that we do not get autocomplete options. After that, we're using different divs to create different fields of the form. So the very first field is going to take the full name. It is of the type text. Its name is full name, ID is also full name, and it is set to required. After that, we have the ID card with the name and ID equal to ID card as well, then salary, and then the city. Once that is done, we're actually creating the submit button, and the class for that submit button is form action buttons. And also, we're actually applying some mouse over events. So we have the mouse over event and the mouse out event as well, which we will also create in JavaScript. So now if I simply click on this go live button, I will get the output on the browser. So currently this is the output on the browser. After that, let's head inside the CSS file and let's give it some styling. Again, check the attached file for the styling of CSS because this is not a course about CSS but JavaScript. So whenever you basically copy paste the code from the CSS file, you can clearly see that we have attached some styling for the table as its width. Table border has been set to collapse width. We have even styled some of the table headings, table rows, and the input fields explicitly. And after that, we've also actually set the alignment of the form action button to the right so that we get the submit button to the right. And within the form, we have set the pointer of the cursor to A tag. And after that, we've even set the validation error to red and the margin has been set to 5 pixels. So now if I save this CSS file and head back over to my output on the browser, you can see that my form is styled in such a way. So we have these input fields which have the property as required. So if I were to simply click on the submit button, I would get the validation error that says please fill out this form. Once I do that and click on submit button, I will get the error on the next field because of the required attribute. After that, we want to perform some functionality upon the submit button. Basically, we want to take the values from these fields and we want to display them right over here. So let's do that in the script.js file. So coming to the script.js file, so first of all, in the HTML, remember that we had this function onFormSubmit. So let's create this function. So create a function named as onFormSubmit. And in this form submit function, the very first thing that we want to do is that we want to get the values from the inputs fields of the form. Basically, we want to read form data. So what we can do is that we can read the form data within this function, but that would not be a good approach as we want to manage our actions in the form of smaller chunks. For that, I'm going to create a separate function which is going to be read form data. Once that is done, we need to create that function as well. So let's create that function. So it's going to be function read form data. And the very first thing inside this function is going to be, we're going to create a variable that is going to store that form data. Just like that. And it is going to be an object. Now inside this form data, we are going to simply create elements one by one with the help of square bracket notation, and we're going to set the key values as full name, and we're going to set it equal to document.getElement by ID, So in the full name, we're going to use this ID which is equals to full name as well. After that, we're going to use the attribute dot value, and similarly we're going to get the values for ID card, salary and city. Now we have fetched the values from the form, but we want to actually return this form data. So first of all, we're going to come right over here and catch the returned value inside a variable. So it's going to be variable form data, set it equal to the function, and within this function we're going to create a return value. So return form data. So that was reading the data from the form. Now once that is done, if I simply head back to my output, so when I click on this submit button, I want a new table to be placed right over here beneath our form, and that table is going to show the data that we have fetched from this form. So for that we need to insert a new table in the HTML file as well. So let's head back to the HTML file and let's scroll to the bottom where this table ends and insert in this table. So again, you can get this code from the file that is attached with this video. Anyways, as you can see that we have the table. In this table we're simply setting its ID equal to employee list. So what we are going to do is that when we use JavaScript to insert new rows inside this table, we're going to use the ID equal to employee list. And within this table, we have actually set the table headers as full name, ID card, salary and city. So now if we head back over to the output, we can see that we have this table that is going to be used to display the data of the employees that we have. After that, let's use JavaScript to actually show the fetch data from the form inside this table. So let's head back to our JavaScript file. So in this onFormSubmit button function, in here we're going to create a new method which is going to be insert new record. Now this method is actually going to take the variable of form data as an argument. So let's create this function. So let's type in function insert new record, which takes in the form data. Now within this function, the very first thing that we want to do is that we want to get the reference to the table that we have created under the ID employee list, and after that we want to get the tag name which is tbody. So for that, simply type the following line: variable table is equals to document.getElement by ID. In here the ID is employee list. After that we are going to select get element by tag name underneath this ID employee list, and the tag name is actually tbody. And after that we are going to select the first element within this body of that particular table. Now this insert row method actually takes in the index value on which you want to place that row. And what we want to do is that we want to place it at the end of the table. So we are going to pass in the index value as table.length, which actually tells us the last index value. After that, we are going to use this new row variable that we have just created to access the cell in which we want to place in the data. And we are going to store the reference to that cell inside a separate value or a separate variable. So we are going to create cell1 is equals to new row dot insert cell, and then we're going to place in the index value of the cell in which we want to place in our data. So starting off, we have the index value as 0. After that, we're going to now use this cell1 reference and use the inner HTML property to insert data inside this cell. And now to insert data within this table, we're going to use this form data variable. So it is going to be form data. After that, the name of the key. So the very first data that we want to insert is actually full name. So just like that. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to duplicate these lines 3 more times for ID card, salary and city. After that, I'm going to change the respective fields as well. So we have cell number 2 at index value 1, and we also want to change this cell number 2 as well. Similarly, cell 3 index value 2 and cell 4 index value 3. After that, I also want to change the name of the key. So after full name I have ID card, after ID card I have salary, and after salary at the end I have city. Now if I save my program and head back to the output and type in the details inside the form like John Doe, ID card number, salary and the city, and then when I click on the submit button, I can easily populate my table inside right over here. Now there are a few things missing. First of all, I want to show the icons to edit and delete this record. So let's add them right now in the cell number 4 as well. So what we're going to do is that we're going to simply type cell 4. Now in cell 4, we are first going to create a new row. So let's call the function new row dot insert cell, and this time around the index value is going to be actually 4. After that, we're going to use the cell4 dot inner HTML and set it equal to an HTML string. So basically this is an HTML string that is creating icon. So the icon is defined under this particular name, and we have even applied the onClick method which is on edit, and the other one is on delete, which we are going to create as well in JavaScript. So now if we head back over to the output on the web page, you can now see that we have the edit button and the delete button, but we still have to add in the functionality. After this we have another problem. The form is not resetting. Once the table has been updated, we also want to reset the form as well. So let's add that in our JavaScript code. So what we're going to do is that right after the insert new record, we're going to create a new method which is going to be reset form. Then let's just come at the very bottom, let's create this function, and what this function is going to do is that it is only going to get the reference to elements with their ID like full name, and it is going to set their value equal to blank, just like that. Similarly, do this for ID card, salary and city as well. Now after we have resetted the form, we also want to create the method which was on edit. So let's create that function as well. Now this method, as you can see right over here, is actually taking in the reference to our row. Now to utilize the functionalities of updating a particular row, come to the very top of the file, and in here we're going to create a new variable which is going to be selected row, and we are going to set it equal to null. And with this, we are going to also set it equal to null when we reset the form. Now whenever we click on the edit button, we want to assign some value inside this variable selected row. So what we are going to do is that we're going to simply say selected row is equals to td, which was passed as an argument, dot parent element and dot parent element as well. So this entire statement is actually going to store the entire row inside this variable selected row. Also, when we have clicked on the button that is edit, we want to make sure that we do not call the method insert row, rather we actually update the method. So for that we need to insert some checks inside the function on form submit. So we are going to say that if selected row is null, only in that case you're going to call the insert new record method. If that is not the case, you're going to call the method as update record, and in here you're going to also pass in the form data. Now coming back to the edit method, now inside this edit method what we're now going to do is that we're going to take the values from the row and paste them inside our input field. Now for that we're going to simply call document.getElement by ID like full name, and then we're going to set it value equal to selected row dot cells and the cell value or the cell index for the respective value. So for full name we have the cell index as 0, and not only that, we also want to set it equal to cell indexes inner HTML, just like that. The same goes for ID card, salary and city. So let me just quickly change the respective values and the respective indexes as well. Now once that is done, we want to create the update method, because here we can see that if the row is selected, it is going to call the update record method. So let's create that function as well. So the function is going to be update record, and this method is actually very easy. We're just going to use the selected row and its respective cell values and set it equal to the values inside the input fields, just like that. And the same goes for ID card, salary and city. Now once we have created the functionality for edit, let's also quickly create the functionality for deleting a particular record from the table. So for that we're going to create this method which was onDelete. Now this onDelete method also is getting a reference which was td. Now inside this method, the very first thing that we are going to do is that we're going to confirm the deletion from the user using the confirm method. In here we're going to simply say that are you sure you want to delete the record. If the user is sure about it, then we are going to set a new variable row equal to the reference of the parent record, which was td.parentElement.parentElement. After that, we are going to access the table using document.getElement by ID, and our table was employee list. And in that table, we are going to call the delete row method. And in this delete row method, we are going to pass in our reference of the row variable that we have created right over here. And then we are going to use the row index value, just like that. Now once we have done that, we also want to reset the form. So let's call the reset form method that we had previously created. Also, this is not actually cell1, this is cells for every row. Now once that is done, you are basically done with the functionality of your form. So let's check it out quickly. So let's head back to the output on the browser and let's insert multiple fields inside our table. So the reset form is working perfectly fine. Let's add more fields. And now we want to edit the details about the second field that we have inserted. So simply click on the edit button. It refills the input field, and now we can change the details. So what if I want to change the city from New York to London? So let's do that, and then again click on the submit button. As soon as we click on that button, we can clearly see that the city field has been updated and the form has been resetted. Now what if I want to delete this third record? So simply click on this delete icon and you get this confirmation. So upon this, we can simply click on OK and our record number 3 has been deleted. Now once we have done that, we are done with this project. But if we head back over to our HTML code, we had these events on the submit button, which was mouse over and mouse out. So let's quickly add them as well. So let's head inside the JavaScript and let's quickly create these two functions, which was function mouse over, and it is going to restore the reference, which is object. And in this, we're just going to call object.style.background color, and we are going to set it equal to a custom background color. Similarly, we're going to set a different background color for mouse out, just like that, and the color value also changes. Once we do that and head back to our output, this time around if I hover over the submit button, you can clearly see that the color changes. Anyways, that was all about this project that you can create with the help of JavaScript. Now the thing is that you have come to the end of this course. Now there are infinite possibilities that you can attain and achieve with the help of JavaScript. But for that, what you need to do is that you need to regularly practice JavaScript and come up with new projects, ideas and implement them. For that, I wish you good. Congratulations, you have completed this course. So now what you can do is that you can hone your skills that you learned within this course. So basically, pick up project or maybe create your own projects and implement them in JavaScript. And make sure to share your achievement in the linuxhint community and we will guide you with further more details. And if you want to learn anything else other than JavaScript, then make sure to check out the other courses presented by linuxhint. And I wish you good luck for the future.